Hello. Can y'all hear us? Wait, did we press the button? Is it good?
Yeah, we did. Here we go. 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 You ready?
Yeah, so that was like that's the whole intro, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I'm done.
Basically just lore.
We've done the Orc and Goblin God intro within the first 2 minutes of the stream. It is completely for Lorebeards, unprecedented. We normally don't get to our intros until at least half an hour's passed.
Yeah. Oh goodness gracious. But hi everyone, hope you're all doing super duper well. We're back. Poor Andy has been through the ringer.
I don't want to bring it up. It's just been the worst. Let's just say it was several hours of my life I'd like to get back. I don't want to think about it, but at least I can now talk without gurning, twisting my face, going, "Ooh, the vibrations. Ooh, it's horrible." But I am still drinking from a freaking straw.
Yep, so just remember that any support today goes to
our bills increased now too. I think we're paying somewhere in the region of about £8,000 for this stupendous amount of work. Oh,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Literally,
Yeah,
I was sitting there going, how expensive is this? Yeah.
Just remember, whenever you see Andy, there's just Sarah McLachlan music just playing in the background. Support.
Oh, I see. I know. I've just figured out what you're saying. Yeah.
Except for it's in the arms of an orc instead of in the arms of an angel. But yeah, it's good to be back. Of course. Today's gonna be a fun one. We're back with another god.
It's gonna be a potentially controversial one for some as well, as you're gonna find out in the intro.
Yeah, Gork and Mork are a
Don't give it away. Don't give it away. I want it for my intro this time. None of this giving everything away thing that you like to do.
Yeah, all I'll say is that they're awfully important for something that you'd be like, there should be so much here, and you look and go, oh,
all
right.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one quite a lot. Yeah, quite a lot indeed. Anyway, before we get going, let's dive into our super chats, have a good little chat with you all, and once everybody's gathered, we'll dive into the intro about Mork, Gork, or Gork and Mork, and just how much crumping they do.
Darius, good morning, says, also, like Waaagh, I'm a great dancer. Waaagh, he just grooves, man. He's literally just grooving. It's not necessarily a high skill dance, but he's vibing, and we can all appreciate that. Darius Rose, my tribe would have to be the Heartbreak Gets. The Heartbreak Gets.
The Heartbreak Gets.
Yeah, they start off seeming much friendlier, and then they start fighting, and then it gets real bad.
You're gonna have to come up with a good orc warlord name for Shawn Michaels now, because you've started this process. You've got to see it through. How can you take Shawn Michaels and make it sound completely orky, but not like Shawn Michaels, but definitely Shawn Michaels? Give it a go.
Is it not updating the super chats? Because
it is on my side.
It's not on my side. I might have to refresh here in a second.
You might have to refresh. Well, if you disappear, we all understand.
Yeah, because for whatever reason, it didn't have like this one in it.
Let me double check to see if it's on my side.
Because I only have 6, and it should be way more than that.
I've got 13.
Okay, yeah, I'll refresh here in a second.
Yeah, refresh.
Sotek, after a long acceptance, yes, I probably would be Savage Orc Shaman. That's that guy. I would also have a rogue idol in likeness of Shawn Michaels and its sweet music Emperor class dragons. Sure. You know, whatever brings you joy. That's the important thing. It's just whatever makes you happy, right? It's whatever gets you there. All right, I'm gonna let Andy do the next one real quick because I gotta refresh my page. I'll be right back.
Okay, so I'll just take a moment to say, Mork and Gork. Oh, look how big I am. I'm filling the screen. Or Gork and Mork. The story of Mork and Gork in Warhammer doesn't start where you might expect. I'm going to take you all the way back to the 1980s, to an earlier version of Warhammer, in this case, Warhammer 3rd Edition. Warhammer 3rd Edition is before all the new lore extras have been added that we know and love today. That came in 4th edition, where they reconsolidated Warhammer and recreated it into a new image. 3rd edition Warhammer is far more loose, far more freer. It's almost the Warhammer world as we know it, but not quite. And in this era, the orcs and the goblins are working together. So orcs and goblins aren't separate. They are very much working together as one thing, and they are referred to as goblinoids. Not greenskins, goblinoids. Indeed, their species as a whole, the orcs, the goblins, and everyone that works with them, have half-orcs included, because you also get orc woman folk, of course. And here's a little lore piece that you might not know. Half-orcs aren't half-orc. They're half-goblin. Now, there's a sneaky wee bit of 3rd edition lore you might not know. And back at this point, orcs and goblins, as we understand them, have been kind of defined. They are your East End lads from London, recreated as football hooligans and pretty much turned into their own society as well. So we are very much dealing with your, all right, lads, we're getting together, her, 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 type of dialogue. If we go back to, say, for example, Warhammer Siege, which was a book for both 40k and Warhammer, you'll find the orc general in there talking kind of like 1, 2, lots, yeah, let's go, gits. The general idea of the orcs as we understand them was kind of laid down for Warhammer in this edition. But Mork and Gork didn't exist. There was no Mork. There was no Gork. Because that was created for a different game. And this is where we start off with some controversy. Because a lot of people don't like 40k and Warhammer influencing each other. Because they like to think of them as very discrete, separate properties that live in their own realms. But in these early days of Games Workshop, that is not what it was like at all, in any way, shape, or form. 40k was just, in many respects, Warhammer flung into the future. And all the Warhammer lore was just three. You got space orcs, you got space elves, you got space dwarfs, and they were all called that to begin with. And they had other names added either later or as a small subtitle, whether it was Eldar, as it was then, or whether it was squats, or whether it was orcs with a K rather than orcs with a C. The general idea for 40k came from Warhammer, but Mork and Gork didn't. There was a seminal set of books, and I do mean seminal. These were extraordinary pieces that really gave us our first chunk of proper orc lore. 3 books for 40k. Here We Go, great book. Freebootas, great book. And Warg, with an R, Warg the Orcs. And these 2 books that sort of bridged over from the late 80s into the 90s really dive deep into what orc culture was. Now, it's worth noting, almost everything we know about the orcs comes from these books, and they never changed the lore later, ever, anywhere. They update it a little as we go through the editions, but with all of the 40k lore that we have later, they never really change from the source, in the same way that 4th edition for Warhammer Fantasy Battle defined the Warhammer world, and they never really change it from that point onwards. They just add extra details, and occasionally, go, Elfarian, he's blind now. Oh, no, he's not. They do make changes, but the changes are small. The big scale stuff stays the same. It's the same elf gods, it's the same stuff, but they do add more, rather than just stick with what was there. So, 40k introduces Mork and Gork. Indeed, 40k introduces everything we know about orcs and goblins today, barring maybe 1 or 2 details that were added later in Gorka Morka. And if you want the lore of Mork and Gork for Warhammer, we have to start with 40k, because that's where it begins. Because the Great Orc Gargants are introduced to the Space Marine game. And the Great Orc Gargants in Space Marine, that's Epic or Epic 40k, or it goes through various names at different points. But it's their tiny, tiny, tiny little miniatures with the big, huge orc gargants that are striding over. And these great orc gargants that are first given their biggest treatment, I think about 116 White Dwarf, somewhere around there. It will be an article about Space Marine, because they're basically doing the sell-through for what's about to be released for the game. And in there we get the orc gargants, and they represent Mork and Gork. They're great stomping gods. Twin gods bashing about on the 40k battlefields. And yes, if you're tuning in right now, we are starting with 40k. We'll get to Warhammer in just a moment. So they're stomping around the battlefield, and they get given basically dispensation to do whatever the fuck they want, because they are living effigies of the gods, gigantic creatures called, strangely enough, gargants, that can literally go wherever they want and squash anything they want, because they are freaking Mork and Gork. And if we take a look over into the 40k lore to see how Mork and Gork are first described, they're twins. And they are crumpin gods. They go and fight the other gods all the time. And each other all the time. And they are not, although they are twins, identical. They're just really, 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 really similar. On one side, you've got Gork, who is strong, with a massive axe, and is known for basically beating living shit out of everything else. And then on the other side, you've got Mork, who is also all those things, but he's cunning. He is smart, and he is really clever in a way that we often don't associate with Greenskins. But both of these gods, cunning and brutal and cunning as they are, represent what it is to be a greenskin. And it's worth noting that in these early era greenskins, that they're not quite how we often think of orcs and goblins, or in their case, orcs with a K and Gretchen, in that they're actually really quite clever. And in this era, the orcs are the cleverest. The Gretchen and the goblins aren't. The orcs are, and they generally lead the war tribes. And this is about to get ported over to Warhammer, where the orcs are the smartest, not the goblins. This changes over time, but at this point, cleverness, cunning, a brutal cunning, but cunning nonetheless is a core orc trait. Outthinking your enemies and then crumping them. Har. It's hilarious. Now, they're not smart as we understand smarts, but they are exceedingly intelligent in a way you don't expect. And all of the early stories that all throughout these three books display a species that is clever, that's assessing other species, that's going to war. And in these books, we get our first myths of Mork and Gork. I'll give two of them, because two of them, I think, really do display each of the gods in slightly different ways. The first of which is, which one of the gods do they fight? All of them. And the birth of the squiggly things is explained in these books. Now, you might go, what's a squiggly thing? You know already, if you know anything about orcs and goblins. Squigs. The name squig comes from squiggly thing. And the squigs come from, here we go, you ready? Have your socks blown off? Nurgle. So Nurgle's garden is full of squiggly things. Tiny little twisting creatures. It's absolutely full of them. And Mork and Gork dive into his garden, kick living shit out of Nurgle, scoop up all of his squiggly things, and take them back to the orcs and go, there you go. You can use these in any way you want. Har. And I'm not talking here. They literally crump living crap, led by, in this particular case, Gork, who just comes in and beats living shit out of Nurgle, takes all their squiggly things, and heads back.
Nurgle's just being like, how impatient!
Yes!
They stole my dogs!
Yeah, indeed. And on the other side, so that's the brutal side. That was Gork just going in to Mork's suggestion. Mork is much more cunning and clever. And Mork is the source of the Waaagh energy. Mork is the source of many respects of what will become the Warhammer magic of Waaagh. They both are, because they are twins and it comes from both of them. But Mork was the one that was seen to be the clever one who built the psychic stuff. And all the machines that we know from orcs over in 40k, they are sort of sourced by Mork. And I'll give a single example of that. all of the great projector weapons, all of the great crazy pieces of tech that orcs do are often first described as a Mork projector or something else and then turned into something else. And one great myth for Mork, for example, is up in the skies, well, this may be more of a Gork one. Up in the skies, the orcs like to go from one place to the next. So Gork goes, I want to go up there. Mork points out which one they should go to, and Gork throws his axe at it. But Gork's dim. Mork knows what's about to happen because his axe is actually attached to his arm by a thong, so he never loses it. So he throws it, and like freaking Thor, he flies up into the heavens, getting flung by his own axe towards the place that Mork has selected for the next god to be crumped. As we previously discussed, Nurgle was there. Gork then, always, because he's always with his twin, turns around, grabs Mork, and the pair of them fly across the heavens, taking all of the orcs with them, and land on another planet and beat living shit out of that one now. Mork and Gork deal with the gods, the orcs deal with the mortals. This is the early tales of Mork and Gork, but they are Warhammer 40k tales. And you might go, right, okay, what's that got to do with Warhammer? I'll tell you right now. Back then, everything. Because what they made for Warhammer was entirely fine to port into 40k. And what they made for 40k was entirely fine to port it into Warhammer, as long as it fit. Mork and Gork 100% fits Warhammer. So what happens? The 4th edition comes along and rewrites everything. It rewrites the orcs and the goblins. It binds them together as one effective people. It gets rid of the concept of half-orcs entirely. It drops the term goblinoid and brings the idea that orcs are much more important than the goblins, directly porting it over from 40k. And I do mean directly. Mork and Gork don't have a great deal of mention inside the 4th edition army list for the orcs and the goblins, but they are there throughout. You've got a banner of both Mork and Gork. The banner of Gork makes you much more fighty. The banner of Mork makes you much better in magic, because that's the difference of Gork and Mork. One is all about hitting things, the other one's being clever. And clever was often, during these eras, marked out as who was the most psychic, who was the most magic, who could do the most sneaky shit at the table. So come 4th edition, Mork and Gork have been ported over. We don't obviously have great gargants, nor do we have the idea that somehow these gods have supplied the orcs with all of their abilities. And by abilities, I mean the ability to create tech, make crazy shit. That was all Mork's creations. That's dropped because it's fantasy. Instead, the fantasy version is just brutal and cunning and brutal for the two gods, but they are identical. The spells, when they come out for Warhammer Magic, are again lifts from 40k and moved over. The idea that the literal gods of the orcs will be summoned by the orcs during the magic phases, where they use their own equivalent of Waaagh magic. And Waaagh magic is psychic magic from 40k that they are building up by getting super excited, and their great orc Waagh's building. The idea of the orc Waaagh comes from the orc gods, Mork and Gork. The idea of the Waaagh energy comes from the orc gods, Mork and Gork. And they completely supplement what is the color magic system, high and dark magic, with this entire separate system for the Ed Banger orc shamans. So instead of the psychers that we had over the weird boys that we had in 40k, whose head blew up and they got too much Waaagh energy in them, didn't release it in time. Instead, it was just Waaagh energy that came from Mork and Gork and the gathered orcs as they got together. And when enough Waaagh energy was built up, Gork and Mork came to the battlefield themselves as their feet manifest from the sky. Fists come smashing down. They summon their gods to battlefields and bring them in to pummel their enemies because it's kind of cool and kind of fun. And that's, loosely speaking, where we get Mork and Gork into Warhammer. It comes from 40k. And all of the rules for the orcs and goblins came from 40k. All of the tone for the orcs and goblins came from 40k. Literally everything about orc and goblin lore starts in 40k. There is no, Oh, do they? Oh, where does it begin? No, there's none. It comes from 40k. This is not one of those ones where we're going to say, oh, Warhammer, it's the beginning point. I mean, Warhammer is the beginning point for Games Workshop. Of course, Warhammer Fantasy is the older setting. But sometimes the younger sibling, in this case, 40k, creates some pretty damn cool ideas. And in this case, those cool ideas are Mork and Gork. However, from 4th edition, and let's just bridge it all the way into 8th edition. From 4th through to 8th edition, Mork and Gork are used. They're not developed. They're not turned into something bigger. In truth, they're not really given any extra major myths. What they are instead is given maybe a broader pantheon. And by the time we hit 8th edition, Mork and Gork are still described in exactly the same way, brutal and cunning and brutal. They are different gods. They are twins, but one of them is definitely the strong one of them is definitely the cunning one, until it's the other way around. You've got to remember that orcs and goblins aren't the brightest creatures anyway. They get things confused. Indeed, sometimes, in some small corners of the Lord, some believe they might even be the same deity, and they just think they're twins because, ha ha ha. But regardless, Mork and Gork are instead mentioned as being at the head of a pantheon of gods, and that's worth noting. A pantheon of particularly goblin gods, because the goblins have a lot of different gods. They're deeply superstitious creatures. We've discussed one of them before, the great spider god, the great devouring entity that they worship. There's a host of others as well, with Mork and Gork sitting at the top of this great pyramid, this big pile of dung that is their gods. And their gods all respect Mork and Gork as the top dudes, because they are frequently getting attacked by Mork and Gork and kicked in, or alternatively, Mork and Gork are beating living shit out of each other as well, because they're basically giant orcs, or giant goblins, depending on how you want to see them. And Mork and Gork are pitched as the epitome of what it is to be a greenskin. They are both brutal, but they are also cunning. By the end of 8th edition, Warhammer, the goblins and orcs are given a slightly different position than where they were originally. Where originally the orcs were the clever ones, the goblins instead take that place. In many respects, they take up most of the Mork aspect, most of the cunning aspect, where the orcs are given most of the brutal aspect. And because of that, their intelligence drops as the various editions slowly but surely deal with the orcs and goblins and the differences between them. And they become more and more stereotyped. Occasionally you get a clever orc. Occasionally you get a particularly strong goblin. Of course, there's lots that break those stereotypes. But broadly speaking, the orcs are the brutal ones and the goblins are the cunning ones. And when we get our lore of the little Waaagh and the big Waaagh that comes as we move through the editions, they're often associated more with Mork or more with Gork, depending upon exactly how they're pitched. However, when it comes to Mork and Gork, for all that they are, loosely speaking, the source of the Waaagh, they are the Waaagh. It comes from them. For all that they are as gods, described as crumping the other gods, we have surprisingly sparse demonstrations of that actually being the case. There should be, presumably, tons of stories, particularly of the Chaos Gods, because the Chaos Gods are a part of the world that the Greenskins deal with. There are tribes that move up into the Northern Wastes and raid across there and come back down again. And they're often kind of uncomfortable with the horror that is chaos, but they're also accepting of it in a way that some other peoples aren't, because they are resistant to chaos in a way that others aren't, and it's just another source of something to crump. And they believe, as Greenskins, that their gods are kicking living shit out of the Chaos Gods all the time, much as they did all the way back in the very early Rogue Stranger tile books that were designed for 40k, where they literally, as we described in the opening, had Nurgle having his arse handed to him by Mork and Gork. There should be tales all through Warhammer of this sort of thing happening. But the fetishization of the Chaos Gods in later editions, where they became more and more all-powerful, often as a port directly from 40k. Because in 40k, they became more and more powerful, and other gods slowly but surely either fell by the wayside or were just consumed by the Chaos Gods. Meaning that this is kind of brought over to Warhammer 2, and the tales of Mork and Gork kicking living shit, I would say, corn, disappeared. Instead, it got secluded in its own little island. So as we come to the latest editions of Warhammer, Mork and Gork stand as these great pillars of greenskin orkiness. They are what is orky know-whats. They are both brutal and cunning, or cunning and brutal. But the myths that we have around them in the lore are entirely self-contained for the orcs. They don't really discuss what happens with the other gods with any great discussion. That is arguably a huge hole in the lore that should be patched if you want to make the Greenskins feel like they're part of the greater whole of the Warhammer world. But it hasn't been, meaning that we are left here to discuss today who are Mork, who are Gork, exactly where did they come from? And the answer appears to be pretty clear, as we're probably going to dive into, to a small degree, where orcs come from in the Warhammer world as well. And as we discuss that, you might find that their origins are not quite as controversial as you might think.
Fun little intro there.
Yeah. Yeah. Going at a slightly different angle. 40K. Here we go.
Yeah, so, ooh boy, there is a lot.
We get through our super chats first, since we've got a bunch piled up. Let's do those and then dive into our orkiness.
Yeah, so Master of the Eclipse simply says, "Waaagh!" Thank you.
Quite right, too. Oh, that reminds me of games days in the past where the kids would be shouting "Waaagh" like crazy at each other.
Damn it, a suggested name for the fandom I just thought of, Laureates?
Laureate. I like a laureate.
Or laureate.
A laureate's a very UK thing. Don't worry about it. The fact that it's a reference that our good pal on the other side here doesn't get means that it's not a good idea.
Honestly, I feel like there's some people in the audience that are like, oh, well, that's makes it a better idea than if the Americans don't get it. David, Tolkien introduced golf into Middle-earth. Given Games Workshop are based in Nottingham, is there cricket in the Warhammer world?
So, David, that's been mentioned in more than one thing, particularly during the 3rd edition era of Warhammer and the 1st edition era of 40K, where this sort of reference was not uncommon.
Yeah, that it would not surprise me in the slightest at all whatsoever. Autocorrect on YouTube mobile sucks. That'd do.
And it's the same on freaking iPad. The autocorrect on iPad is so aggressive that often the messages I type just come out completely different. And I do blame my iPad in that case, because it loves changing words that are what it considers esoteric into something else, or just changing the word "isle" into "ill." Go, stop it! I'm not that ill. Honest, am I? Maybe I am.
Yeah,
iPad's telling me something.
I am not at all in the slightest whatsoever a fan of how aggressive a lot of autocorrects have become. It's really infuriating when you're trying to say something and it's like, you mean to say this? It's like, no, I'm pretty sure I fucking know what I'm trying to say. Leave me alone.
I'm gonna bring that one up to make sure Veritas isn't meshed.
Veritas, hey you two, I want to know your thoughts of a Knight of the Blazing Sun having their academic endeavor be gunpowder, and him obsessed with showing all knights that they should use it rather than relying just on melee for a Wolfrip PC.
Sure.
I think that works really great. There's
definitely from Meridia.
Yeah, there is not, although it's unusual, it's not by any means unheard of for there to be knights in Warhammer that use ranged weapons. There's a few knightly orders that are really famous for using ranged weapons, such as the Knights of Tal and the knight. Is it the Knights of the Raven or the Black or the
Raven? It's the Black Rose. And the Raven Knights do sometimes use gunpowder.
I want to say it's the Raven Knights. They like to have crossbows a lot of the time. But so yeah, I think that would be super reasonable and would make perfectly good sense for the character. So yeah, I'd say do it.
Yep, me too. The Blackguard. Is it the Blackguard? I'm pretty sure the Blackguard are the Temple Guards, and they're not often using crossbows. I need to double check that. It's been a wee while since I was writing or reading that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I know it's one of those two because it's from the Night Stark Masters book.
And it's purely so they can stake people, and they often have silvered shot at the end so they can take out the vampires too.
Yep. They have the reasonable necromancers are usually cowardly jerks hiding at the back, so the only reasonable thing is to shoot them. Biofoot, what new faction could Gork and Mork make in Age of Sigmar? Well, they already have produced a few with like the Cruel Boys, which are basically just the half-orcs, to be really blunt, kind of reimagined. And they ran very hard with the idea of You have like your Gorky Greenskins with your iron, iron jaws, and then you got your Morky Greens or orcs, I should say, with the Cruel Boys, and that was Age of Sigmar. The interesting thing of listening to Andy's intro for me was that Age of Sigmar is actually, it really sounds like the first time Gork and Mork have actually had something interesting done with them in a very long time, because they have like a whole set of myths in Age of Sigmar of them.
But
like,
that's not in Warhammer yet.
Which unfortunately they don't do until after the Warhammer world is gone.
Yeah. Too fast.
Where in AOS they're very, very active. And they do a lot of the things Andy says they should be doing, which I very much agree with, because we have all sorts of stories of them like creating different gods and punching other gods and creating all sorts of weird, wild things all over the place. And they're making a mess of things in like the best way. But in fantasy, as you'll come to see throughout the video, they walk a really weird line of like, they definitely exist to do things, but they also kind of don't. Like at all.
The Greenskins are just left in this strange little park by themselves over in the corner where their gods just don't interact for all they would 100% be doing so.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that. Necromancer Cobalt, I'm ready to learn about the greatest, greenest of gods. They do be green. They do be quite green. Mortic Crescent says, I genuinely loved and missed very much the Gorka Morka Warband game.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions on the Gorka Worker Warband game, which I'm not going to share here. I played it a lot, by the way. One thing that Gorka Morka did with its rationalization of all of the Greenskin lore in this lovely little snippet at the end, where they very much confirmed the great old one reinterpretation of them with the fungus strain running through, effectively building that for future was kind of brilliant. But yeah, I have opinions on Gorka Morka.
Yeah, I am glad that at least looking back on it, that the fungal thing survived, because it really makes the Greenskins like super fun and unique as opposed to them just being like regular dudes. Magladroth, hey, glad you're back. I was wondering if Gork and Mork have demons, or if they don't, since they don't seem to be etheric style gods like chaos gods. Oh boy,
they do not. There are no mentions of demons anywhere. There's lots of other gods that they do like a Crumpin, and there are other greenskin things that are worshipped by greenskins. So you could argue they are demons, but no is the answer to this. And they aren't like, in terms of the Warhammer world's description of deities, exactly the same sort of gods as the etheric style ones. You're right, they are seemingly different, but they are not like the other gods in another way as well, which is, if we take a look at most of the other gods, they generally have a myth starting point, which is they were on the Warhammer world. They were there, and at some point they leave and they go to their own realms. Mork and Gork don't have that either. They are living in their own little Morky Gorky realm, doing their own Morky Gorky stuff. So there's this weird balance for them. Why aren't they wandering around being Mork and Gork like Gargants in the Warhammer world? The answer is that'd be proper silly, and that's not how Warhammer really works. But why isn't it? Because it really feels like they should be wandering around and not giving a flying fuck about, rules or anything else, and just stomping about the Warhammer world, having themselves a whale of a time. But they don't. So there is definitely an interesting question here.
Yeah, the best way to look at it, I think, is that keeping in mind that Greenskins, we know, according to the records of the old ones, so to speak, and the Lizardmen and such, they were introduced before the Cataclysm. So they existed in this era where, according to the elves, gods were able and fully allowed to just walk the world, and yet Gork and Mork weren't there. They weren't walking around.
There's clearly a story that hasn't been told there, and I think the story is pretty clear. But we can get to that afterwards when we discuss that, I suppose, where they come from.
Yeah. Brom, just read the Skarsnik novel, was great. Was Grom a chosen of Mork like him, or a chosen of Gork? So,
good question.
So, yeah, there is, setting aside the meme of that the two are completely interchangeable, which is, I find, tends to be more of a meme than the truth. As Warhammer has developed, It's very, very obvious when you're dealing with Gork versus Mork. They're very different, despite the fact that there are writers that are like, no, you shouldn't be able to tell them apart. It's like, yeah, but you can. In Warhammer, you could very easily break it down to, if it's a goblin, it's Mork, and if it's an orc, it's Gork. With very, very rare exceptions.
And possibly that's the rare exception, because look at Grom.
Yeah. Grom is where you could make the art, because Grom, as we talked about, if you go back and watch our Grom screen, he's not very clever. He's not. So like, if you compare him to like all the other famous goblin warlords, he's not very goblin-y. So you could very, very much make the argument. But I think if you were to like,
I would say he's brutal and cunning. He's not cunning and brutal. I mean, you could easily make that Grom is the fine example that stands against the norm. He is more of a chosen of Gork than Mork. It seems pretty obvious that's probably the case. And if anyone with any sense was writing it, they would probably go down that line. But you'll find that particularly with a lot of modern writing for goblins and orcs, it's exactly as Sotek describes. Goblins are generally just associated with Mork. That's it. And nobody's really got the bravery to say, no, they're greenskin gods. And they actually go beyond stereotypes. They tend to forget that they're stereotypes. They are not absolutes. And the best stories come from when people move beyond the stereotypes and do something new, different, and interesting. And Grom is that character. As I say, go check, as Sotek said, go check our stream about Grom, and you'll very much see why he's almost certainly not a Mork chosen. Where Skarsnik 100% is.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Aquacone, what are those two? Hey, Sotek and Andy, Warhammer has its fair share of goofy characters, whether on purpose, such as Gork and Mork, or otherwise, such as Malarian in the Old World Core rulebook. Who are some of your favorite and least favorite goofy characters?
This is like a whole thing. We've repeatedly said least favorite goofy things are people like Curious Geezer, stupid name, just stupid. I don't like the name of Salad Bar because it's stupid. There's lots of characters that popped up. All the old Lizardman names were goofy as fuck, and they just weren't very good, you know. And some of them still out there, your teeny weenies, your itsy bitsies. Oh man, no. It was an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini. No, apparently it's a bunch of skinks. It never makes me happy. But the ones that are relatively cleverly hidden, when you get yourself a pun or a reference and they are properly disguised in a fashion that you never noticed it, and then 2 or 3 years later you go, oh no, they are much more my favorites.
Yeah, I will say if you're discussing like a character that is goofy and how they are written as opposed to necessarily named, I personally Gouda. I personally very, very, very much consider Thanquol to be a goofy character, and he's my favorite goofy character in the entire setting.
But his name's not goofy, but he's goofy as fuck.
Not. But it doesn't specially named Goofy, just Goofy is like how they're portrayed.
Totally fair. I'm going to bring up Juniper Ward's one because I agree. The Dim Suns is a great name for it's a goblin tribe, isn't it? I just love it. Those are orcs.
They're an orc tribe, I think.
Orc tribe, thanks.
Thanquol would be my favorite goofy character in the setting. My least favorite, when you're having characters written as goofy, there aren't all that many that I dislike. Most of them are pretty fun.
I dislike.
I'm more with Andy that it's when you have a serious character that's given such a over the top stupid name that if someone was being introduced to it, they would read it and go, this is really dumb. I don't want to read this. That's when I'm like, okay. Like it's too much. It's too much. Sean Schultz, is Andy Gork or Mork? I would lean much more heavily on the Mork side of things than the Gork side of things.
Damn straight.
Let's see. Boop. Laughing on, how many greenskin gods are there? Are Gork and Mork treated like the heads of a pantheon? If this is the case, I hope Andy is feeling better. That's a great question, actually. Yeah. So, in Warhammer Fantasy, they lean really hard into the fact that there's actually like like you mentioned, a pantheon where you've got like the Bad Moon, the Evil Sun. You've got like, primordial wolf creatures. You've got the Spider God. A lot of them are, of course, much more goblin leaning, but you do have orcs that acknowledge things like the Evil Sun. But I would say generally, yes, the lore always paints it that no matter which group subculture of Greenskins you deal with, Gork and Mork are always acknowledged, like they're always a core part, like even for the spider goblins, which are the forest goblins are by far like kind of the most fanatical of the non-standards. They still have Gork and Mork as a big present next to the spider god. So they're always there. They're always present no matter the subculture, whereas like other gods won't be. I don't know if I necessarily said they're always considered the head, but they're always treated with like good reverence by the Greenskin standard of reverence.
Yeah, if we go with the 8th edition version, it's got a little side box about it. It pretty much says, Gork and Mork, they're part of a pantheon. Goblins are superstitious and worship lots of other things, but all of them say Gork and Mork is right there at the top, crumping everything else. So the answer to this is pantheon.
Yeah, which I will say, I'll probably be saying this a lot throughout the episode as we get into it, but Age of Sigmar takes this idea, runs with it in a really delightful way where they make it where Gork and Mork literally create a lot of other gods unintentionally. They do it because they're so destructive and wild that they accidentally are creating gods as they rampage through the setting. And it makes them quite literally the divine head of a pantheon that they've created through their shenanigans, which is quite fun. Nope, we already answered that.
Yep, we did.
Answer Cobalt. I'm certain these two are more complicated than they seem. You might be surprised in a not surprised way.
Yeah.
But I think it will be funny if they actually are as blunt as their followers. Yeah,
they are. They are. So Necromancer Kobold, 100%. You've nailed it. They are. That's as simple as it can be for answering this question. No more need be said.
Yeah, what you'll find in this stream, in my opinion, is that as in characters and historically, they're not that interesting. How they interact with the setting through like their followers is really interesting, which we'll get into that. It's pronounced a quick one. Oh, you're just a skink in disguise. But see, that's a good one because I would never have guessed that.
Quick one,
and then you would have said that, and I look and go, "Oh, I like and hate that in equal measure." Sengemeister, Andy, to your insider know what's is Gazkul Mag Thraka named for Milk Snatcher Maggie T herself, or is it a coincidence in Lord of the Rings Black Speech?
No, it's Maggie Thatcher.
It's funny how much that has turned into like a massive argument.
Why is it a massive argument? It's pretty much well known.
To my understanding, there's somebody at either GW or Black Library that was asked, and they said, no, that's not true. And so it's funny. It's caused like a whole thing.
Sure.
I'm sure someone in chat will know the specific thing.
You tend to find that there was a period, it still exists right now actually, with Games Workshop people wanting to claim that the very clear satire that was running around through early 40k and Warhammer wasn't, because they wanted to remove politics from the game because they were a bigger company, and they wanted to remove the satire because they didn't want to admit that a lot of their characters were nothing more than satirical jabs at power, attempting to prick at power. And that got removed. And the satire of 40k, one of the reasons I no longer really like 40k, has gone. It's no longer satirical. It is celebrating what was once a satirical breakdown of the very worst of what humanity could be. And they now celebrate it as the great champions of that can potentially save the universe. And it is weird as fuck. And I don't like that direction. I still love lots of parts of 40k, but I've moved on from it because I find it a difficult setting to deal with these days. This is a clear example of the roots that it once had that some people would prefer it didn't, so they try to move away from it.
Yep. weird resurgence of trying to defend the milk snatcher. There is. There's
a lot of people who think that she was great. I mean, I don't, but a lot of people did. All you need to do is go read the Telegraph to find another article every other week that says, bring back Maggie Thatcher's way of dealing things. She would have been able to deal with this in the same way that, for example, a lot of people villainize or alternatively lionize Ronald Reagan over in America. And Maggie Thatcher is given exactly the same sort of lionize or really bring her down over here in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Is someone asked Andy
Did
Chambers.
Andy Chambers deny it? I'm gonna have to ping Andy.
Yeah, because I've seen people say like, they said that's not what it was. It's like that's pretty obvious. Is what it was. But
it was
whatever.
I'm like 100% certain it was. But if Andy said that, I would be super interested. Because Andy was there right when it was going.
Nyastra, I love the both of you. Thank you very much. And I'm glad that Andy is slowly getting better. Sotek, will you play a campaign with Lionheart at some point? You could be a student of the Lionheart School of Cavalry. I'd like to do something with Lionheart. I've bumped into him a number of times. There's been like the occasional event where we've both been at in the past. Very, very nice guy. We've had some chats. Actually, if you want to get really nitty gritty, the one last little thing I'll say is that if you go back into the oldest days of my YouTube channel, like right when I started, Lionheart was like the only big YouTuber that wanted that when I like kind of reached out to them and wanted to chat, he actually responded, and we did it. I think it's still up. That if you go way back in the day, I did like a little chat with him where we discussed Total War Warhammer. And it was his first time getting to chat with like a lore person, being myself, but it was my first time getting to talk to a big YouTuber thing. And he was super duper nice. He was super duper nice. So I have nothing but the sweetest of thoughts for him. Donovan, Darius Rose.
I'm trying to remember who wrote the lore for Waaagh. It's really annoying me now. Gaskell's lore. Really annoying me.
It's not relevant.
I don't think Andy started it. It's really bugging me now.
That's really funny. Darius or Diamond says Darius Rose actually inspired a Beastman character idea I had. He's a hairless beast lord who has a preference for kicking his foes. His name is Michaelis the Shorn. That's great. Good job.
Now you're doing it.
Now you're doing it. That's a good one. That's very good. So I'm really glad Andy's feeling better. Teeth pain is the worst. GW should do more with teeth for orcs, though, with shark, dinosaur, and demon teeth collectors. Also, AOS needs orc ethereal units made from shaman dreams. Sure, why not?
Sure to all of that.
Yeah, all that would be great. All that would be super great.
Nice one, Sir Million, like that.
Agar, love having you guys back. With trolls having more defined sexual dimorphism with the giant river troll hags, do you think trolls change gender like Jurassic Park / frogs? Like if conditions are right, having one troll change to a hag. That'd be super cool.
I'd like that. So Agar, you're offering something that I think Warhammer often forgets, and that's creativity. And you might go, but Warhammer's full of cool creative stuff. No, it's often full of adapted material. I.e., they've taken someone else's idea, they've adapted it into something, just ported it over, and then another writer comes on and says, let's add another detail, and they just get lost in these very clear channels of ideas that don't allow for much extra creativity to be added. And something like this, where they take a look at something and go, actually, these species are different. They very much express differently in the Warhammer world, is something that I think is worth doing. It's something we explore a relatively large bit over in the LAWhammer streams, where our elves, for example, are very different. Our dwarves are very different. Our halflings are very different. And it keeps on being a thing right up to this day. Just our last episode, we literally had details about the elf physiology expressing so different to the human physiology when they're dealing with cold. And yeah, I think things like this make the world more interesting.
Yeah, I will say I particularly like this because trolls, as we know, they're so adaptive. Like they adapt so wildly to their environment. And their regeneration helps a lot with that. The idea that one of them could change into a hag based on like environmental factors or things going on, I think is genius. I think that's a super great idea.
Yeah, agreed. I to the point that it's pretty much become my headcanon.
Yeah, that has for me as well.
I like it.
It's like the trolls are like, oh, there's an abundance of resources here, and we're doing well. One of them just starts morphing into a hag, which is great. I actually really like that. Jerry Geronison. Greenskins don't use the winds, but do they use the magic language? Are they just psychers? Pre-old ones supernatural? Did they use magic? Psychers? Magic language? Are the old ones blocking magic with magic language?
So this is really interesting, Gary, because there is an established form in the Warhammer world of how the world of magic works. And that's that we have magic seeping into the world from the gates. The winds of magic come over. If we want to go back to the earliest lore, they called it the flux. But later on, it becomes the winds of magic. It's not a new piece of lore.
That's kind of an unfortunate name.
An unfortunate name. It's been running around since pretty much the mid-'80s. The idea that magic comes into the Warhammer world. It got codified properly in the very early 90s into the colors of magic as we understand them today. And this magic can't be seen by anyone except for witches, those who've got witch sight or second sight or whatever you want to call it. And they channel it into themselves using a sense, using the ability to channel, and then using words, they form that magic that they've gathered together into an empirical effect, i.e. a real world effect. So there is no fire around them. They summon the magic into them. They say some words, and the magic they're holding in front of them turns into a fireball, and then they unleash it in the direction that they wish it to go. The form of magic in Warhammer is pretty clear. Orcs don't do the same thing. Their magic doesn't come from the winds of magic. It comes from other orcs generating the Waaagh energy around them. And their shamans, those who are closest to Mork and Gork, and as we've discussed in previous streams, are also receiving effectively divine wisdom from them because they know stuff genetically, hard-coded into them, because they're 40k orcs. They've got in them, they know shit. They are capable of doing the right chants, the right rituals to bring it about. Not all of them are using the lingua prestantia equivalent, the language of magic, to make things happen. Sometimes it's just a dance and a desperate horror as they're trying to get it out of them before it blows their head up, because there's so much going around. And they're dancing like crazy, going, "Ah!" And then suddenly, Gork arrives. And an enormous foot comes from the heavens and strikes down as he's sitting there wildly going around chanting nonsense, literally nothing to do with the lingua prestantia. Now, the lingua prestantia is a precise set of enunciations that will change magic into form. Doesn't matter what species you are, doesn't matter what you are. If you can channel magic and you enunciate those words, regardless of your species, you're going to enunciate the same words. Because that's what causes that form and effect. That's how it works. If you're in Cathay or if you're in the Empire, you're saying the same shit. It's the same loose spells. Orcs ignore that bullshit. And there are lots of other examples in Warhammer that ignore that to a degree as well. One example would be divine magic, where they use prayers instead. How does that work? There's a lot of discussion we could have on that. But here we have a very clear example of magic that's built up in a different way and unleashed in a different way. So the answer is no, they're not psychic. They're different. They're doing something different. Now, could it be said that they're using psychics from 40k? No, it's different, but they are doing the same thing the orcs are doing in 40k.
Yeah, one of the things that's kind of funny, to be blunt, about the Greenskins is they had to go through some kind of weird writing because the people making the game were like, well, they have to cast magic in the magic phase, and in order for the game to work, they have to do the same thing and they have to be dispellable, which then reflected into the lore of the setting and create. But even if you read 8th edition, if you go to 8th edition, you go to the shaman page, it literally says that they kind of use the winds of magic, but that's not all they use. Like, what they're actually using is the energy that they produce, but it interacts with the wind of magic in a weird way. But it doesn't require any specific wind. Instead, it's this horrifying mess that makes all other wizards in the setting look at them and go, what the hell are those guys doing? It's super interesting.
So if we look at it, because this question is interesting, it's worth dwelling on a little bit more. Waaagh energy comes from Mork and Gork. Ultimately, that's the root of it, if we go by the myths. And the orcs, as they're getting more and more excited and they build towards a great Waaagh, build this energy around them. And it's unlike any other energy you might go, but it's not, because it can be dispelled. It can be interrupted using the Winds of Magic. In fact, the Winds of Magic and the Waaagh energy interact in lots of interesting ways, which means there is actually an answer here, which would be somewhat controversial if you were to write it in black and white, and that is that orcs are capable of generating their own Wind of Magic that's unlike the other 8. And that is how it's handled by the rules. The rules say the orcs have their own Wind of Magic that other spellcasters cannot interact with, and it generates and builds up. Now, later, they are going to combine this with Gur. They're basically going to say, it's Gur. Yeah, that'll do it. Woohoo! We've got an answer. But that is not the case in Warhammer. So Warhammer Fantasy never really combines them with such clarity. Instead, they say orcs generate their own magic, and that magic can be interacted with and used by orcs only. But others can interrupt it using magic systems because it is ultimately magic, which is why I say let's not use psychic here because it feels incorrect. But it is, loosely speaking, the same system that 40k uses, which means that psychic feels like it should be the same thing because we're like, well, in 40k, it's all psychic, isn't it? Yeah, nah, go over to 40k and you find that orc psychics are just using magic in a different way over in 40k as well. They've got their own way of generating it. But it is, interestingly for Warhammer, directly related to the Winds of Magic.
Diamond, okay, just thought the idea of Gork and Mork being twins or brothers hasn't been dropped in, really been dropped in either setting. However, in fantasy and especially 40k, Greenskins reproduces fungal spores. So how do they have familial relationships to their gods who are Gork and Mork's parents? Do they just emerge from the same godly spore? So, so those are good questions. That would have been, that would be nice if they were answered. So, okay, so the first thing I'll say is that Greenskins use a lot of terminology that if you were to get into the nitty-gritty of how they actually function, doesn't really make sense for them to use. But because, like Andy talked about in his intro, they weren't always mushroom spores. They used to just be like normal mammals. But when they got evolved into mushroom spores, there wasn't like a big meeting amongst the writers. So they were like, okay, you can't use gendered terms anymore. You can't use terms like birth or brothers or twins because that doesn't really make sense. Nobody had that discussion. They just went, nope, orcs are still going to do that. Like if you read a Black Library book, for instance, it is super normal to come across orcs doing things that imply that they know what sexual organs are and what they're used for, because they'll be like pretending to hump something to annoy a dwarf that's like across a canyon from them. And you're like, they wouldn't know what that is.
Yeah,
more than
it's
likely.
Weird. I mean, I'm going to just call this out for directly what it is. This is an example where the rule of cool has completely overridden anything that makes sense. The lads, as the orc boys are often referred to, they're orc boys. They're not just orcs. They're the orc boys. They all gather together in great big tribes or units, depending on which version of the language you wish to use. But all of their language is gendered around male. And there's a reason for that. Because originally, the orc boys were boys. The orc lads were lads. The orc knobs were nobles. They had an entire society, an orc culture spelt with a K, ending with an R, no E in the end. Orc culture. And the great orc armies were followed by entire trains of orc womenfolk and babies and all sorts, because that's what they were originally. But as we moved into Warhammer 4th edition, they dropped discussing anything other than the core army. That's it. That's all that was discussed. So we just got the boys and the lads, and it was funny because the orcs talk funny, don't they? Har, har, har. That makes for fun. So they kept all of that. And then the spore thing comes in and it completely spears everything that they have done so far, because it now says there are no women folk. There are, in truth, no lads. There are no boys. There are just greenskins. That's all there is. Greenskins. And there's no answer to it. Yeah. Either they have to rewrite everything for the greenskins, rewrite all of the language used for it, or just sort of just paint over it and just pretend that all the gendered language makes sense. So this is something that is very much a holdover from where the orcs and goblins came from. And it also speaks to various writers coming in and trying to fudge it. Take, for example, when the Old World started up again. When the Old World started up again, they very clearly mentioned half-orcs again. They dropped that on the website. Half-orcs, we're going to possibly have them kicking around in the Old World. And then that all got sort of brushed under the carpet. Why? Because really, they're spores. Or are they? Or are they not? What are they in Warhammer? And they didn't really pin it down, but they sort of did. And that doesn't make sense. So ultimately, the answer here is orcs don't make sense. And they don't make sense because they haven't made sense for a long time. And the language used for orcs is so ingrained into what Warhammer orcs are that they can't change it. Because they no longer sound like Warhammer orcs. Well, here come the lads, here come the boys, except here come the orcs, here come the goblins. It loses some of the flavor that they have written into their setting for the last 30 years.
The only thing I can think of that would allow them to fix it, but it would be like a significant amount of history being added to the species, which wouldn't be, I don't think, a bad thing, would be that we know that greenskins really like to steal or adopt ideas from other cultures that they then like transform to their own thought on it. So, like, you could have an idea that they developed the idea of stealing language from other species that they have fought over thousands and thousands of years. And, you know, maybe from fighting lots and lots of dwarfs, they've stolen ideas of that. But trying to translate that into how they talk nowadays is really hard. It's really hard.
And any attempts to retrofit it with, oh, they're just, you know, big macho ads is bullshit. Any attempts to do that really doesn't understand language or how language works or how even interaction of language properly works. The gendered terms are really weird. And the more you look at them, the more weird they are, particularly in Warhammer, orcs and goblins have their own language. And their own language has literally no concept anymore of male and female. It just is. You just are.
Maybe the secret is that there's some empire historian that translated the greenskin language and he assumed they're all boys, so he just put a gendered language in and everyone's like, yeah, sure.
Sure. It's a weird situation, but it's one that just is what the greenskins are. So it's one of those ones where you just can't change it. You've just got to squint and accept it. They're not going to change.
Yeah. That being said, as far as Gork and Mork's origins, the greenskins don't, to everything I've ever read, they do not have origin myths in fantasy. Like they don't, and to be fair, they don't care.
They just are.
Yeah, they just are. Greenskins are very present focused, which is one of their, honestly, a very big strength of theirs within the setting.
Although they're often telling tales of their past. Well,
true.
let's not lose what many of the shamans coming down and telling about the great Waaghs.
But it's not like in the sense of like some great historian that's obsessively studying it. It's more of like a shaman blurting it out when they're building up energy to get all the lads all fired up and stuff.
The lads.
But it's interesting. That being said, the idea of twins wouldn't be that crazy, even with the spore system. If you take the Skarsnik novel as gospel, which I don't have a problem with doing, but some people do, because the book is very deliberately written where it might not be true, which was smart on the writer's part, because it's Skarsnik dictating his life to a guy that was tortured, and then that guy wrote it as a play, and then it's being read by another group of characters, and that's the version of the story you're getting. So you're getting like a third-hand account of what actually happened. But in Skarsnik's novel, it gives the idea of like how greenskins emerge from the spores, and the way it works. It would be unusual, but it wouldn't be by any means impossible for two greenskins to
be born from the same place,
from one stock. Yeah.
I think that's completely fine. I don't think the idea of effectively twins, or indeed even possibly triplets or quadruplets, is entirely outside the realms of possibility. And the orcs, greenskins being greenskins, they almost certainly would squabble right from the point of their birth from the earth or some equivalent. So yeah, I have no issue with that. The gendered language, though, is definitely a bit dodge.
Yep. Charles CK, could orcs that function like AOS's cruel boys exist somewhere in fantasy? Where do you think you'd best plot them if so? So cruel boys, they're basically just skinny orcs. They're orcs that are slightly skinnier and they're more sneaky. They're more morky. They could easily exist in fantasy. They would just exist in an environment that does well for that. Where I would expect to see them would be like the Marshes of Madness. The Marshes of Madness having this type of orc in it would make super easy sense. You wouldn't even have to explain anything.
Yeah, all you're looking for is an environment where you can hide, where you can sneak, where you can do stuff and be a bit more Morky rather than Gorky, and where Gorky isn't going to be the primary useful trait. For example, if you're out in the Badlands or in the worst of, I mean, it's not a good place over there. Or if you're sitting deep in where the Wolflands are, you're out in the open. That is less useful to be Morky than Gorky. But I think not only would some equivalent of the Crow Boys exist, they just do. They just do. It's not anything that lies beyond the realms of possibility. It seems sensible for the setting.
Yeah, one of the things that was always a little bit of a shame was like the goblins in Warhammer Fantasy are really exciting and fun to explore because they have so many fascinating subcultures, and then orcs just kind of don't. Yeah. Other than they're black orcs, that's about it. Yeah, which were like manufactured as opposed to like, you know, so something like this would be nice. I wouldn't be upset if they did something like this where there are orcs that have adapted to various environments.
And it completely makes sense. However, I think the chances of it happening are relatively low because it's been done in Age of Sigmar. And as we all know, porting from Age of Sigmar nowadays is just not the done thing, to the point that entire species are wrapped up in Age of Sigmar when they should be sitting over in the old world like the Skaven.
Yep. Akiyoshi, cheers, Andy and Sotek. Are Gork and Mork gods of the Greenskins as creatures or gods of the Greenskins ideals and behavior? Both. They encompass everything that is to be a greenskin. Could other races worship / receive boons from Gork and Mork? No. I
mean, you'd be welcome to.
You could.
I mean, you've got a big pile of dung with wooden bits sticking out of it, with a big maw sitting in the middle, and you can understand why they got conflated in Age of Sigmar later, the maw and Gorka Morka. But you've got this effigy. Could you worship it? Sure. You want to worship that pile of horror that the orcs have left behind? You could. Would it work? Yeah, no. It's not going to work in a metaphysical way. And are you going to be getting a boon from Gork and Mork? No. What is a boon from Gork and Mork? You do it yourself. Orcs and goblins don't pray to Gork and Mork going, please come down and help me. That's not how they work. They are far more self-sufficient, and the more that get together, the more likely the Gork and Mork will turn up and start stomping.
Yeah, one of the things that's very which I think we might get into this in a second, do a pause on super chats actually, because this could be just a good point to jump into it and discuss it. And also to your last bit, are the other races aware of them? Yes, many different races are aware of Gork and Mork,
and it's a deep point of philosophical divide for some as well. Because the greenskin gods do act differently, but they also act in the same way. In fact, I think this is worth diving into just a little bit in terms of their origin and also how other species regard.
I will say the last thing to your super chat, Akiyoshi, is I would really recommend checking out the Tome of Salvation from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition, because it has a segment on Gork and Mork, and there's some really fun little things in there. Like there's a witch hunter of the Order of the Cleansing Flame who literally talks about people that have tried to worship Gork and Mork, and that it's like, you know, he's obviously just talking about they need to just be killed immediately because they're traitors. But it goes into that it just doesn't work. But this makes a good segue to discussing Gork and Mork as gods when compared to other gods, because that gives us a good frame of reference.
It does.
Gork and Mork are super duper interesting. If we look at it from the idea of, so we've talked a lot about gods here on Lorebeards, whether it was a couple weeks ago with Raya or many of the other weeks where we talked about like Cain and Korn and a bunch of these other deities. The gods in Warhammer Fantasy do tend to follow a trend, which is that you're usually dealing with a mostly purely etheric entity that has like a very ancient history that we could dial back to somewhere around Cataclysm Age, that has an interesting dynamic with followers of various races by giving them blessings or mutations or some kinds of godly gifts, basically in exchange for worship and devotion and acknowledgement.
I would say that's not necessarily the case. I would say that if we're being broad across the species, it's not worship or acknowledgement, it's instead acting as they act. And doing the same thing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there's any worship or devotion at all. It's basically being like that god. And that's particularly more of an elven approach than, say, for example, the far more worship-based approach that many humans would do. Dwarves, for example, don't worship in the way that we understand it.
But dwarves also don't have like gods in a way that we... But
again, emulation is their core point. And yeah, I think that's an important distinction because it is different. In the Warhammer world, you often find that many of the priests are terrified of their gods. They're not worshipping. They're very much going, oh, the gods, and there's lots of individuals who are not worshipping a single god as we understand it. They're basically there to try and hold off all the gods. And there's lots of discussions of that, both on the chaos tribes, who have got entire groups of people that are there to hold off all the demons and the gods, or draw their attention when it's important. And it's not necessarily a single priest or champion, for example, to a single god. So there's lots of different ways to express, but broadly, I would say more emulation of that god's ideals.
Yeah, but we have a wide spectrum. But at the end of the day, we have this kind of etheric to mortal reality pipeline. Gork and Mork don't do that.
I'd like to add another detail there, just to make sure we don't lose it. And that's that almost all of the gods, almost without fail, have a myth that has them there at the beginning of time during the Cataclysm, physically, on the world. And that's worth noting. Whether it's Nehkaran gods, elf gods, whatever. Yeah, human gods, exactly the same. They've all got tales of when they were wandering around the Empire before the tribes of man came. Whether it was Tal doing his thing, that's happened in the most recent LAWhammer stream, or whether it's Ulrich doing his Fiststrike Mountain. There's stories of the gods on the planet, and then they leave, and they all go. All of them. Everywhere. We don't have gods wandering around the Warhammer world anymore. They have gone. They are no longer physically present in the world. They're on the outside. And this includes the Chaos Gods.
With a couple of cheaters, but yes.
There's a few cheaters and those who get around it for one reason or another. But broadly speaking, they're no longer in the Warhammer world. And there is myths for why this is the case. A bunch of core myths. And Mork and Gork, it's worth noting, lie both outside and entirely within this. In that, Mork and Gork, there are no myths anywhere saying that they wandered around the world. There's none that I'm aware of, at least. But equally, they don't wander around the world. And I reckon if they could, they would. I mean, they're simple creatures. If they could, they would. So there is definitely some form of ban from this being possible in the Warhammer world. If you go to the elves, they've got a clean description of how this happened. Azrin, their great divine creator of all things, the top of their pyramid of gods, he made a rule. Gods, fuck off. We're done. And withdrew from the world. And all the gods left. All of them. So if we go with the elven version, their king of gods stopped all gods from interacting with the mortal realms. And this appears to also bind Mork and Gork, in that they can't come unless there's this great build-up of Waaagh energy, which is their energy. It's their godly divine essence that is channeled by the Greenskins. And when they do that, they don't come physically. They're not literally there. It's these great, almost etheric foot stomps as they can finally come through. They can finally interact with the real world, and they start boshing and crumping and having the times of their lives. but it's very much from the outside in, not wandering around like giant gargants from 40k, being massive orcs going, killing everything in their path. So that isn't the case. So there appears to be a divine ban that is definitely in place. And I think if we're discussing Mork and Gork, we've got to make it clear that we've got characters who would interact directly with the mortal realms if they could, and they don't, which means that we have a very clear ban in place on what they're doing.
Yeah, but of course what makes them seemingly unique is that from all what we could tell, they were always banned. Like there was never a time where they seemed to have been allowed.
Because there's no myths of them at all wandering around.
Yeah, like we do have like the Greenskins were accidentally, depending on how you believe it, introduced to the world by the old ones, and that the Greenskins started to reproduce so rapidly and became enough of a problem that the Saurus were unleashed in a war of extermination against them, which failed. Though it did drive them underground. So they weren't really super present necessarily for a lot of the big moments of the Cataclysm. But one of the things that's really interesting is, like Andy said, like that all holds up, but there's the thing of like, shouldn't, if they were here before Ashura made this decree, which they seem to have been, why weren't Gork and Mork stomping around leading the Greenskins against the Saurus legions or causing problems before the old ones were like, oh, we've had enough, send out the Saurus or what have you. And but as far as we know, there's nothing. There's nothing.
Which means that we're left with a gaping hole in the lore. Fortunately, it's a gaping hole that's not so wide if you have a quick think about it. Because I'm going to state it as bluntly as I possibly can here. And I know that this is going to be controversial to some, particularly some Games Workshop writers. But as it stands at the moment, the introduction of the Greenskins into Warhammer comes from 40k. It comes both in reality, in that the lore, as in the real world, our world, all the lore for the Greenskins got ported from 40k over to Warhammer. All of it. It all comes from 40k. This is 100% a 40k thing. At one point, 40k and Warhammer were being effectively built at the same time, and the orcs and the goblins, the orcs and the Gretchen, were being built with the same voices, the same style, the same tone all the way through. Then 40k, as I said in the introduction, went wild. It released 3 seminal books that completely changed Greenskins forever. And all of that lore that was appropriate then got ported into Warhammer. So in reality, the Greenskins come from 40k, but also in setting, they come from the old ones when they arrived in their ships, and they arrived in the world from 40k. It's the old ones. It's the same. They are trans-dimensional creatures that go from one place to another. And this is cool, because we then have a very clear reason for why Mork and Gork weren't there to begin with. Because they weren't. The warp, the aether, that otherworldly connection point between all the realms is enormous. It's beyond, it's infinite. And it's also very, very far away. So what happened was the Greenskins arrived, they start building up Waaagh energy because it's what they do. And they summon their gods because that's what they do. But by the time Mork and Gork arrive, the ban is already in place. So it all makes sense. This embattled, embittered people, because the Greenskins were properly assaulted by the lizardmen across the planet. They were in trouble. And they're calling on their gods because their gods are hard-coded into them. They are their gods, but their gods are so distant that they're doing a mighty, here we go, here we go, here we go, across the warp, trying to find, they're obviously in big red ships because red ones go faster, trying to find their lost tribes of orcs, going, where are they? We're coming, lads, here we go. But by the time they get there, they're knocking on a giant wall going, what the fuck? How can I come? What's going on here? And the Warhammer world is different to 40k, as we've discussed multiple places. Magic expressed differently. The whole world itself expresses differently. But we clearly have a ban in place, meaning that they then can't directly interact, but they have arrived, for want of a better description. It ties up the knots neatly and takes all those loose strings and makes everything make sense, because we get a timeline then. The orcs arrive. They're in trouble. They call their gods. Their gods are distant, deep in the warp. And eventually they arrive, but by the time they arrive, they can't interact directly, so they are left just calling upon the gods using Waaagh energy that they themselves gather in the Warhammer world. It sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very reasonable theory to take. Jumping from Akiyoshi's comment, so when it comes to boons, another thing that's very, very interesting about Gork and Mork is that most gods, not all, but most gods in the Warhammer world get directly involved with their servants, like their followers, worshippers, whatever you want to call them, calling on them, whether it's in the form of a prayer or in the form of a spell, which it can be for a lot of them, and the god answers. And, well, if they're lucky, the god will answer and not be pissed off. And something will happen. And there's a relationship there. Whereas the Greenskin gods don't really do that. The Greenskins very strongly believe that Gork and Mork are not there to help them. Gork and Mork are there that when they're having a good time and they're having a good punch up, if it's a good enough punch up and it's a good enough of a riot, that the gods will go, yeah, this is fun, and they get involved and they just join in the fray. But they're not answering blessings. They're not answering prayers or a spell that's like, hey, can you punch those guys over there? It's just they just get caught up.
I mean, the shamans are sort of doing that, and we have to be careful that we don't make that a categorical statement, because you're right. The Greenskin gods absolutely don't care. They're just there for the fight, and in many respects, the shamans aren't so much summoning them with prayers. They're basically going, "It's over there, gods. That's where the fight is," and they're almost like beacons in the night, rather than they are summoning them per se. And then the gods turn up and wallop in the area, go, yeah, there's a fight, oh yeah! But the big problem with that being that they're Gork and Mork. The goblins and orcs will also die in this potential mess. They're not friendly gods. They're all about crumping.
No, it's like, it's some of the spells, when you read like what's happening lore-wise, they're super funny, of like the whole thing of like, Gork or Mork like reaching down, like these big hands reach down, they just pick up a handful of Greenskins and throw them where the fighting is heaviest, and the Greenskins are like, yeah, as they just get like flung into probable death. And of course,
so much fun.
Yeah, you know, of course, the stomping spell, which is super famous, and if you've ever played that spell, you know, Gork and Mork, once again, they don't give a shit, because that spell has always had a thing where if you roll a 1, the enemy player gets to represent Gork being like, I don't really care, and he starts stomping on his own guys. They start stomping on Greenskins instead of the enemy, because they're just having such a good riot. They're not really like aiming so much.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to sum up Mork and Gork as to who they are, they're the gods of the riot.
Yeah.
Okay, channeled riots in different directions. The gods of the Waaagh, the gods of everything just going, and the great mob mentality taking over. Rather than they're often referred to, and I think both accurately and inaccurately, as in fact Tech Priest has brought it up there, as forces of chaos. But in Warhammer,
chaos, yeah.
yeah, totally, literacy chaos. Because they are kinda okay, but they are channeled, focused chaos. But whenever we use the word chaos, you tend to find that has an implication in Warhammer for obvious reasons. So I do not like, and have never liked, using that word when describing Greenskins, because it gets people confused, and you don't want to confuse folks, because immediately people go, oh well, then Gork is just Khorne, isn't he? No.
Yeah, one of the things that I find super interesting as well, when we're talking about like the relationship between them and the shamans, is how we don't see them giving traditional divine gifts to their most favored servants. Like, they don't have mutations. They don't have weird glowy bits. They don't have divine halos, or grow a third arm, or like have like the aura of a god behind them. Like the Greenskins gods, very much, they show up when there's fighting, and when the fighting's over, they piss off.
Yeah, and I think this is worth reinforcing because Greenskins in general aren't like most of the other species in Warhammer. There's a reason for this. Their psychological makeup is so unlike what gods like. Their psychological makeup is so focused on individual stuff that is not the Chaos Gods, that the Chaos Gods find them almost impossible to interrupt. They don't have that deeper imaginative thinking. We've discussed this before with the ogres, but orcs don't fall to chaos in the same way that other species do. And that means that finding mutant orcs, even when they're getting exposed to chaos stuff, is rare. And this comes right from the original description of the orcs as presented in the Freebooters books. Here we go, Waaagh the Orcs, where they very clearly mark it. Orcs don't fall to chaos, unlike all the other species in Warhammer 40k. They just don't do it. You still get mutants because, hey, that happens. But those mutants are still orcs. They are on the orc side, not chaos side. And they've got some really weird boys back then in those early days, but they are very much still orcses that you can use with orky armies. And that's, I think, a clear thing that was, again, just ported straight over. We don't get Warhammer orcs that fall to chaos. Why is that? Because their own gods do everything that they need. There is no temptation from chaos. There's nothing that chaos can offer that makes them go, oh, yeah, lads, you know, maybe we should do a bit more of this, Waaagh. You know, let's fall to the excess of Waaagh. No, they don't. They just don't. They just are. They're almost a force of nature. And that force of nature means that they don't have this higher intellectual process that falling to chaos generally requires. And if you want to use the far more swirly nature of the aether or the warp, where the gods are nothing more than the collection of various types of emotions, in many respects, all orc emotions only go to one place, Mork and Gork. All of them. And they don't fuel Khorne or Slanesh or Nurgle. They don't fall to despair, even when they're in one of their grumps, sitting down going, oh, I don't know about this, boys. That's about as far as it gets for them. When they are going full-on horror combat, such is their rage and such is their channeled nature of their bestial, I suppose, focus, that it never hits Khorne. Khorne, it needs more than just simply rage. There's more going on there. And the orcs all go to Gork and Mork. And if you go with that particular theory for the warp, and that is fascinating when you actually see the impact that they have here in the good old Warhammer world. And it also gives a relatively core story for why Gork and Mork went there to begin with. It required the orcs to basically warg it up to begin with before they arrived.
Yep. All right. I'm going to do some more super chat stuff, and then we're going to get back into another topic. Magnadoth, we did get it. Yeah, we did get it. My thing was a little weird, but we did get it.
Yeah, it's okay. I caught it for you.
Dumbass. So overall, Gork is more orky and Mork is more goblin-y. However, it's weird that some goblin cultures have additional gods like the Bad Moon and Spider Orcs, but orcs don't seem to. Yeah, I mean, there are orc cultures that
Imagination is largely where it goes. So if we take everything that I've just discussed here, and I say all of it goes to Gork and Mork, yeah? Goblins got repitched over time. To begin with, it all went to Gork and Mork. But as goblins got developed, and we got lots of different types of goblins, and then the justification for these different types of goblins were then sort of moved into place. And they went, yeah, but they're worshipping a spider god or the Bad Moon or whatever. Or the evil sun. That turned into goblins also having more imagination and effectively forming different gods within the great swirl that is Gork and Mork. They do have a pantheon. It isn't really weird. It makes sense within the established form of how Warhammer gods work. So I don't think there's any particular problem here. And it also creates a very clear idea for why only Warhammer has it over 40k, because of the way that the Warhammer world works.
Yeah. That being said, there are some orc groups that do have like a slightly broader pantheon, where you have things like the evil sun is really common among certain badland groups, because they're out in the sun and it sucks and it hurts and it drives them and it's evil. it's a presence that is to be feared. But I
want to bring up Hugh Milner's comment just because I like it. Khorne requires surrendering to the rage, but orcs never resist it in the first place. Yeah, there is that need to effectively make a step and go too far. And the orcs don't go too far. They just are.
Yeah, the only time an orc goes too far is when they just have too much Waaagh and then they just blow up. So, any wish to invite TS?
TS is the best. Perhaps the Rookery. So, Hendrik, funny. Given that I'm the CEO of the Rookery. Yes, TS is the best. I love TS. He and I used to call almost every week for a good chunk of time, particularly during Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay days. I love TS deeply. I haven't spoken to him for a very long time, though. I have no idea whether he wanted to come on. I can always ask him.
There you go. Make sure to remind Andy at some point. Veritas, in AOS, I have a small church to Gork and Morka in a human city, and what they do most of the time is hunt monsters for fun and throw giant parties. For a human's interpretation, I think that works great. I'll just leave it there. There's some other stuff I can say related to AOS, but it's not important for this. Take matter. I like to imagine Gork and Mork sporadically breaking into various Chaos Deities' realms and running amok before vanishing as quickly as they appeared.
Yes.
That's what they should be doing. In fantasy.
100%. There should be, whenever a great Waaagh goes, Gork and Mork should be having that Waaagh equivalent on the other side. Whilst we have great detail of the great wars between the greatest gods, particularly because there's almost a fetishization of just those gods amongst some writers because of how important they became, particularly to the 40k setting. In the Warhammer setting, Gork and Mork should very much be brought into that whole debacle, really, the great fighting that is happening over on the divine realms rather than the mortal realms. And they would have Greenskins, all the Greenskins that are dying there are coming right into the etheric side and joining it. Greenskins have got a belief system where they believe that if they basically Gork and Mork it up, they will keep on fighting by Gork and Mork's side forever. That is a core component of Greenskin belief. That's one of the reasons why they just keep on plowing on. They don't care because their war never really ends. And that is what happens on the etheric side. They should be fighting off against chaos gods and anything else they can get their hands on, plunging down into Tal's realm and having themselves a right old party through what's going on down there, diving into the hunting realms of Ulrich or whatever else it might be. I think this is a core component of the myths that is sort of missing. And it's not just missing from the Greenskin side, it's missing from, say, the human side or the elf side, where their gods are being impinged upon by what is an invader. Very much an invader. The arrival of Gork and Mork on the scene fucks things up. And I think if we were building a proper story for the Cataclysm, part of that story would be the rumbling of the world when Gork and Mork arrives and finds out that they can manifest. Fucking right, Azurin's going to say, oh, God's out. Because that would be terrifying. He would shake the very world to its core, the pair of them. So I think there's definitely something fun there that could be played with. But yes, you're right. Dark Matter, 100%.
Yeah, something that Andy said that I want to reinforce is that one of the big criticisms that I would actually level at Warhammer Fantasy writing is that when you read through all the histories of the Waaghs, it's very much from a very kind of bland, physical, well, not bland as in boring, but bland as in it's a very physical, dry telling of what happened.
Yeah, it's mundane.
And what they should have done is they should have included a lot of little things about how the Greenskins actually retell the stories and how they retell Gork and Mork's involvement. Like the story of Grom the Paunch invading Ulthuan should have had elf gods getting in punch-ups with Gork and Mork and him like grabbing and shaking the island. And that's why the island...
having already slapped down the Empire's gods, they're popping over to the elves because the Empire wasn't hard enough for them. You're useless. Grom got bored. He just hung around in Nuln for a while going, this place is shit. We kicked in Sigmar. It's time to go over there and kick in some elf gods. Yeah, there's cool stories in here that the orcs almost certainly would have that are never touched upon because no one's really thought about the greater metaphysical truth of what the orcs are.
Yeah, because it should be that what the Greenskins are doing in the physical realm reverberates into the etheric realm and causes things to happen. It's not just a story. There are things actually happening. And unfortunately, writers just kind of forgot, I guess, about Gork and Mork. Because if you read through the editions, you basically will get one page where there's like a paragraph or a little side note that says Gork and Mork, and then you read it. Yeah. And then when you get to the magic item section, there's some mention of them, and that's it. They don't exist otherwise in the book.
Yeah, it's sad and slightly upsetting, but there's a reason for that. It's because the war game is focused on what's important for the war game, not orc culture. But sadly, the only place where we get proper orc culture is in all the early lore for 40k. 40k does it. Go read it. I recommend popping out those ancient books. They are right from the early 80s, I mean, the late 80s, early 90s.
Well, we should say ancient 40k.
And it's old 40k at that, but it is worth having a look at because you go, I know all of this. Yeah, sure, all the orc tribes and how they work in 40k are different to Warhammer, but the core myths, the core stories are all stuff you'll just go, oh, right, yeah, this is what Warhammer is. Funny. So yeah, worth having a quick look at.
Yep. What are your thoughts on purple orcs? They're goofy, but I will say Warhammer Fantasy orcs are much more capable of the whole belief thing than a lot of people realize. Our whole concept of savage orcs, which this is a fine moment to talk about them very briefly. Savage orcs are, of course, the orcs that don't they hate like advanced technology. They believe the old ways were best, and they are orcs that are obsessed with. They basically just live off what they could get from their kills of like bone and hide and leather and being wild, but they cover themselves in war paint tattoos. And the thing is that in the book, it quite literally says that these tattoos they paint on themselves protect them from harm because they believe it will. That's literally what it says.
It's how orcs channel their Waaagh energy effectively. The Waaagh energy that's generated by orcs has real effect in the mortal realms. It's as simple as that. If you want to give an equivalent of what's happening here is all orcs generate Waaagh energy. They all do. Every single last one of them. And that means to a degree, all orcs are spellcasters. All of them. And they can change the material realm around them. And the more orcs there are, the more they can do. And some of the orcs are so super sensitive to it that the gods themselves get channeled through them. That's our equivalent of our shamans. But all orcs are basically capable of, if you go into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay side, of channeling to a degree, but they don't have the control of it the wizards have. Wizards can control their channeling, create spells using words. Instead, they are entirely bound by their culture, by their belief systems. And that expresses as real world effects around them because they absolutely believe it. In the same way that in 40k, red ones go faster, and they do. Because Orc believes it. Red, not only that, their projection technology in 40k works. Why? Because they believe it. Everything that they do works because they believe it, and it's tied up into how the Waaagh energy works.
Yeah, and what I want to say is that I personally have always felt that the Savage Orcs are sadly underutilized in the setting of that they should take this to its natural extreme. Of that, if you have a Savage Orc Waaagh, like you have a whole tribe of Savage Orcs that's their belief is so fanatical that it kind of creeps out other orcs, and other orcs are like, oh, those guys are a little weird. But if you're going to have like, oh, there's a tribe where they paint their boars red, or they prefer red-haired boars because they're bigger and they charge faster. They would.
Covered in blood. Yeah, be awful.
Or like a tribe that's like, oh yeah, no, they paint themselves with purple paint because it makes them real stealthy. Like if you had there should be a story of that having an effect where there's this horrifying group of savage orcs that are specialized in like the way, because of their Waaagh energy, the way like the winds bend around them functionally makes them invisible, which is not that unusual in Warhammer. There's spells that can make people invisible. The idea that
Drax in the corner, Drax.
Yeah. That is what Savage Orcs should be. Unfortunately, they kind of get relegated to just, oh look, they're frenzied, the end.
And that's because Frenzy's so fucking cool in the rules often. But it's also worth noting, Savage Orcs, they are old in the game. They're all the way back to the early editions of Warhammer, before Mork and Gork even existed as a concept. And the idea of the Savage Orcs was nothing more than a racial joke, and a bad one at that. The idea that tribesfolk in the real world were scared of technology. And the original Savage Orcs were basically people who were afraid of technology. They literally had to use fear rules whenever a war machine arrived. They were like, oh, if a war machine hits them, they've got to do leadership tests or they run off the battlefield because they're so terrified of technology. They're so terrified of civilization. And it's a bad, really bad racial stereotype for what tribesfolk might have been like out in the various hinterlands of civilization as it was understood, particularly back in the 80s. This gets updated when Mork and Gork becomes a thing, but the core of what they are never does. So yeah, there's some interesting bad history with Savage Orcs that really nice if it had been properly implemented with the updates.
Yeah, well, and you could see it with the old world because they're not even called Savage Orcs anymore in the old world. They're called like they're not a separate unit. It's now an upgrade you take onto like regular orcs. I forget what they're called now. I don't remember if they're called Mad Orcs or Frenzied Orcs or something.
Or whatever they're called, that kind of cool.
Yeah,
if anyone in the chat can remember, that'd be great.
Yeah. Gary Gurunnison, as a Scotsman and an American, how do you like to see a Hungarian-inspired faction/group/play? Stupid, gruesome, stereotypical answers are welcome too. I don't know enough about Hungarian to know what would even be Hungarian, unfortunately.
So, yeah, Gary, this is one of the great problems with Western writers as a whole. The only stereotypes that they tend to draw upon, and by Western writers, I am very much using us here, Scotsman / American, someone from the UK, someone from America. They often only draw upon the stereotypes they know, which is the peaks of European history. Things like Romans, Nazis, maybe the French, and they really don't have much of a grasp of the deeper European history, Magyars and what they did or whatever. They've no idea of the different groups of people that came through their great histories or the great individual countries and everything that they did. Meaning that when it comes to doing something like this, the vast majority of the writers don't know where to start. And I would do nothing but insult you if I gave my really weird, twisted Hungarian view. And I'd rather not do that because I don't want to look like an idiot. And much like Sotek suggests, I don't know enough. But I certainly feel that if I were to sit down with somebody who did know enough, we could build something exceptional using it as a source.
Yeah, what I would say is that my favorite thing is to sit down with someone that is from and is very educated on a particular place and being able to say, all right, I know Warhammer, you know this thing, let's go on a journey and see what happens when we meet in the middle. And it's fun.
In fact, I just did a PDF that was almost exactly that, about a unique set of hedge folk over in Britonia. And that was using all the ideas of someone who was, I don't want to out them. Go read the PDF if you want, but they've got all of the necessary knowledge, okay, and history to really bring some unique ideas into what could be a French and other people inspired background for these unique people. And we released that for free. You can go check it over in the LAWhammer blog if you want. It's like a 19-page PDF with a whole bunch of cool new pieces of background in it about the Demilier families. And it's super fun, but I would never have written that, ever. I, in many respects, didn't write it. He may have been writing in a third language, his English, and I may have rewritten it all so it made sense in English, but all of the ideas, the core ideas that are in there, are all his, and they are not what I would have built. And I think this is something that, if we were doing this, I would want to do it with someone from the local area. They are the ones who are going to come up with all the cool ideas and the stuff I've never heard of and go, yeah, that sort of shit needs to be added. I've got the skills to turn it into good English. I've got the skills to turn it into good Warhammer background because I know the rest of the Warhammer background, but I don't have the skills to do this.
Yeah, just go watch our Koresh stream or our creating a Warhammer God from scratch stream and how people in the chat were throwing out ideas from things that they were knowledgeable about, and we created something like really fun and fascinating. I like to think, I think if you're a big Warhammer lore person and you're wanting to do something like this, you should think of yourself more as working with someone to translate things into Warhammer as opposed to creating everything yourself.
Yeah, agreed.
Doomlord of Malal, how would Greenskin Wolf heavy tribes view Ulrich? That's a great question that they don't explore. The wolf tribes of the Wolflands, in particular, and the various Goblin Wolf Riders, they have concepts of like a primordial wolf that's mentioned in a few for some around like Gatilla the Hunter and other various special characters. And they would, because the Ulrican tribes, which supposedly followed Ulrich to the old world, came from like up in the eastern steppes. So they came down through where the hobgoblins are, who use giant wolves, down through the Wolflands area, where there are giant wolves, into the Empire, where there are also giant wolves. So they would almost assuredly have understandings and myths of what Ulrich is, and great epic sagas about from the Greenskin perspective, the incredibly awesome battles and hunts between Gork and Mork trying to wrestle down and break the wolf god, and how that's gone over the course of history. But that's not something that's been explored within the setting.
Yeah, I broadly agree. This is something that's not been explored. But if you want to put it into its simplest terms, crump him.
Yeah, crump him. Or, you know, if I were writing it, maybe going into an idea of like that Ulrich had pups, and one of his great god pups was taken by Gork and Mork.
Sure.
You know, and something happened there. Scarfist, Punchington. Very nice. Welcome to a stream that's definitely about you and your gods.
Look at that! Look at that picture.
Thank you guys for all the nerdy fun you put into the world. Anyway, headcanon. The Bad Moon in Age of Sigmar isn't Morslib, but the realm of Waaagh! I will tell you that in Age of Sigmar, it is not Morslib at all. Not in the slightest. It's really, really, really not. It is the literal story behind it is that it is like a great satellite, like, you know, great moon that Gorka Morka took a big interest in and tried to eat. And when he bit into it, it was so tough and like powerful that it broke one of his tusks. He was like, ow, and then he like threw it. And by him doing that, and when he got wounded by it, his like godly essence leaked into it, and it became sentient.
Sure.
And it's a whole weird fucking thing. But although it's based on Morslib, because in Warhammer Fantasy, Morslib and the Bad Moon are the same thing. In AOS, they're very, very different. Morslib does not have a true descendant, but the Bad Moon does. If the concepts got pulled apart in AOS.
Yeah.
Donovan, the comment about Jurassic Park trolls reminded me. If you want a weird as hell prehistoric creature to add to Warhammer in your own universes, I would recommend the Mine Taster Hexagonalis.
Don't know that one. Might look that one up later.
Sidgemeister, do you prefer your Foot of Gork booted or bear? So the tabletop had it as bear. Always. Total War Warhammer actually went with booted, which was very controversial for anyone that wasn't around when that when Warhammer 1 came out. Personally, I've come around to, I think it should depend on the tribe and how the tribe like actually has their own aesthetic. I think makes it fun. So like a Savage Orc tribe would have bear, but like a big, more traditional group of orcs with like lots of black orcs and stuff might have a booted one, because I think that could be like a fun way of showing how Gork and Mork is interpreted differently and might manifest differently depending on the tribes. But in the lore, it's always bear.
Bear.
Skylar Martin, should Greenskins corrupt or change the land around them due to Waaagh energy, similar to how dark magic does?
No.
I would say no, because it's not dark magic.
No. It has nothing to do with dark magic, which both Chaos and vampires do. And we don't have Dar. There is no Dar here. The Waaagh energy appears to be rather sympathetic with the world, not antithetical to it. The Waaagh energy doesn't make plants die. It doesn't make things go weird. It doesn't mutate. Waaagh energy does nothing more than excite orcs and get them going even more. So the answer to this is, I think, clearly no, Skylar.
Burmatel, you're back. Shun is signing again. Oh, wow. I didn't realize we had taken the light out of your life.
Evil sons.
Yeah, we'll watch later today. Family event, meh. Complete derail. Any chances for Khalid or other Tomb King topic in the future? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially Khalid, because she's cool.
Yeah, Tablam, here to represent my Dawi fans who are too busy writing you into their books for choosing this over their Falea. We didn't choose shit. That was y'all, not us. We had no impact on that.
You
whatsoever.
voted, not me.
Also, Andy, I love you, but now I can't stop reading conspiracies into the smallest things or phrasing. You damn Lord of Change.
Yeah, well, that's what makes Warhammer fun, and for me, it's one of the things that keeps me coming back. For those of you who've watched LAWhammer, you'll know it's full of all sorts of weirdness, all of which could be true in the lore, most of which is nonsense. But one of the reasons I've done that is because every time I've played Warhammer, to keep it interesting, a big long campaign that's lasting more than, say, 6 months or a year, I have changed the metaphysical truth of what this version of the Warhammer world is going to be. And I can do that because the lore is so, let's say, contradictory, and has so many holes in it and has so many weird stuff. And that's to its benefit. It's one of the reasons why writers love it, because they can come in and write something of their own within it. And LAWhammer, in many respects, is that. It's writing something of our own within the Warhammer world that is so very different to everything else offered. So, yeah, I think it's great. I am a damn launder change, and I love it.
Also, I'm going to grab this one real quick so I don't miss it, because I did see your super chat, Arda. First time catching you live. Welcome. I meant to send this message to my super chat. How would you compare the Greenskins' understanding of technology to 40k orcs? So, understanding is a funny way to put it. That they're probably not that dissimilar, to be honest. But the fantasy Greenskins do a lot less with it. Where the most advanced tech comes from snotlings that don't actually know what they're doing. They're just following a compulsion to create bizarre pump wagons and machines. But in fantasy, we don't have mech boys, or any equivalent. They just don't exist. Which obviously, if you want and you're playing around with your version of the setting, you can change in the snap of a finger, very, very easily. It's just not something that they decided to do with the fantasy orcs.
Because it's fantasy.
Yeah. But which, I mean, you look over at Skaven and Chaos Orcs and they're like, oh, okay. But ultimately, that's just not what they do in fantasy.
Yeah, so, Arda, we have an interesting piece of lore that's not ported from 40k. And there's a reason for it. The fantasy orcs and goblins are based upon the various other properties that use orcs and goblins equivalents, and get ported into Warhammer at the very early stages. And then when they create all the new versions over in 40k, as I discussed in the intro, and then ported over all the lore that's appropriate, if they brought in the mech boy, they would change what orcs and goblins are. They would turn into 40k orcs and goblins, which they don't want. They want fantasy ones. So the core of it is very obvious. They don't want this. It makes a shit version of fantasy. They're not doing that. But we do have an interesting question, a theological question, if you will, about Mork and Gork. What's going on here? If they are just 40k orcs that have arrived, what has happened in the world that has forced them to change? Why are they different? Why is there no mech boys? And the answer to this is uncertain. I think, though, that we do have a broader issue here, and it might be worth an entire stream at some point, because technology as a whole in the Warhammer world is broken. Really broken. Technology does not develop as technology should. And you can try to justify it with, oh, they have magic. But no, it's not enough. They have had black powder weapons of various types for thousands of years and have never developed a proper rifle and a proper next step from rifling up to modern weaponry. They could have done this a good couple of thousand years ago, easily, given the tech that they had. But they have not. And the big question then is left with why? And the answer is, we have a reason in Warhammer why tech doesn't advance. We just don't know what it is yet. I mean, there is a huge hole here, and I think that the answer is orcs are constrained by the same thing that everything else is. They just don't get past a certain level. And the tech that they do, they don't understand, so they don't build up through black powder to their big, huge bolters or equivalent. They just build bolters. Because that's how orcs work in 40k. They just do it. The mech boys just build shit, their projection technology and all the rest of it. But they can't. So the mech boy equivalent in Warhammer just fails. That part of their genetic strain doesn't work.
Also, just want to grab this real quick. But what about squiggy flora and fauna when it comes to when we were talking about greenskin quote unquote corruption? It doesn't overly change it. It's not like Greenskins get mass produced in a place that has a lot of Waaagh energy, or like the squigs change in some radical way. They don't. Everything continues at a very normal, natural progression.
Yeah, they're part of the existing flora and fauna of the world, and it also doesn't grow particularly well in light. Evil sun is real, so most of it is held in the darker places where their mushrooms, their spores, swell in darkness and the appropriate material. It doesn't just spread everywhere, and suddenly there's giant mushrooms everywhere. You will get that where tons of orcs are underground over the course of multiple generations, and if you go down into any of the old orc holds, for want of a better description, the ones that they took over from the orcs, they are full of mushrooms in there. Loads of big, weird mushrooms all over the place, and squiggly things doing their squiggly thing. Squigs are everywhere. But yeah, no, it's not something that I think would be a proper corruption or taint thing like we see in Total War.
Charles, given the discrepancy between Age of Sigmar and Fantasy's orc magic, could there be a headcanon about Gork and Mork crumping Gur and taking control of the wind? Yeah. That would have actually bothered to have explained it instead of what they didn't do, which was explain it.
Yeah, agreed. I think, Charles, that is one great way that you could easily tackle it. And also, it's, as retcons go, not a really big leap.
Yeah, no, if they like in Age of Sigmar right now, they could release like a new book and tell a story of this in its like pages about there's the great myth of Gorka Morka taking on Gur during the world that was and like beating it into submission and devouring it, and now it's now he's Gur, and I'd be like, cool, they
makes sense.
Great.
Yeah, 100% makes sense, because there is a discrepancy between the two, and I imagine Games Workshop, being Games Workshop, often doesn't patch these things very well. They just ignore, so that discrepancy will be ignored, and then Fantasy will turn into orcs use Gur. That's more likely, I think, than them fixing it in a way that allows both of them to be discreet.
Luckily, they didn't do in the old
They didn't.
world,
I was really happy too.
So luckily, they didn't do that. But
it wouldn't surprise me if that doesn't come in a one or two editions down the line. They just consolidate, because they often do.
Which one is Gork and which one is Mork? Discuss / fight amongst yourselves. So we discussed this earlier. As much as everyone loves this meme, myself included, it's really just a meme. They are noticeably different from one another.
Yeah, Gork is big and boshy and also cunning behind it, where Mork is cunning and clever, but also boshy behind it.
Yeah. It's kind of like with IRL twins, where if you don't really know them that well, you can't tell them apart, but once you get to know them, you know which one you're talking to. Sebastio, did the old ones use the same base template to create elves, dwarfs, humans, ogres, and halflings, as the old ones seem to reuse anything they can? If true, are humans and all others elfoids? I would say no, but it is an argument that could be, like, they're all mammalian creatures that have some similarities in that, like, they have flesh and a general same bone structure and things. So there does seem to be like a vague template behind it, but when you get into the nitty gritty of how they like function, as far as like what are their interactions with like magic and various other things, how long they live and all these things, they're so hysterically different. We're like, I mean, think of like our world, right? And how actual evolution works, and like how we're not that necessarily different from like certain kinds of fruit or plants. Like we're not that far removed. And I think that answers your question.
Yeah. So things like this are always fun theory crafting, but they are largely that. We do, however, have clear instances in the lore where each one of these species is described as being uplifted. That's not born from the same template. It's uplifted. So the old ones come along and they take the proto-elves, the proto-dwarves, the proto-humans, proto-ogres, whatever, and they turn them into something that's different to what they once were. And each of these species are then consolidated as a new type. And this is ancient lore and more modern lore. So I think the answer to this one is, for as much as it could be fun to theory craft, as it stands, no.
Teleman says, this is something Games Workshop would never do, but it would be interesting if orcs in the old world tend to use boys, but in other areas where armies are more mixed gender fighters like Cathay, they don't, because they've adopted and stole it from other nearby cultures. That would be fun. You're right, they would never do that, but that would be fun.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something potentially in that, but yeah, I don't see it ever happening.
Yeah, that hypothetically, that could be something I could see, like maybe the roleplay game tackling one day, but it would never show up.
That's a little detail.
Yeah, it would never show up in like the battle game.
I mean, it might be tough to get that past approval if it wasn't done well. You would have to write it in a fashion that really felt greenskin and orky, and it really supported them without collapsing into what appears to be nothing more than weird gender politics.
Never forget, we still have big titty orc cheerleaders in Blood Bowl. That's still a thing. Yeah, it's still canon. So in the multiverse, we still have lady greenskins.
Damn straight we do.
Cole Patterson, well, orc women would clearly be femboys and laddies. That's good. That's actually very funny. Tyrant, how much of Greenskin society is subterranean? A lot. A lot. The mushroom thing they've leaned more and more heavily into. So they like to be places where the evil sun can't get to them. So underground, under dense forest canopy, beneath holds in the mountains, they're very, very often underground.
Yeah, and I like it. It creates a new dynamic for the species. There's a lot of people out there that don't like greenskins being fungus based. And I'm totally cool with that. Warhammer itself tends to avoid answering this question because I think many of the writers and many of the staff don't like it either because they don't like conflating 40k with Warhammer. That has become such a divergent topic these days. There's Warhammer Fantasy is its own thing. 40k is its own thing. Don't make them the same. But I think it really supports the greenskins as a different species and makes them more interesting for Warhammer, particularly when you then add all of the Warhammer world's additional details to what the greenskins have become there, because the Warhammer world is so vastly different to how 40k expresses.
Let's see. We then have right here. Magladroth, can a human lead an orc tribe by basically defeating the war boss and then taking his spot and going on raids, etc., or is he not green enough? To my knowledge, this has never happened.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that would have happened back in 3rd edition Warhammer.
And it has, there is I wouldn't call it relatively famous, but there is a fairly old, in the grand scheme of it, Black Library novel that follows a human character that does something kind of like this. There's this really, really cool woman character. It was a book surprisingly ahead of its time who ends up becoming like a big hunter for an ogre tribe because they take her in as a baby, but they do it with ogres, not with orcs.
Yeah, I mean,
but I
this is a tough ask.
This probably should have been a thing at some point.
I mean, this is a little bit like looking at, say, what Diganob became for Gorka Morka, where you've got the human tribes that effectively follow and ape the greenskin tribes. But strangely enough, none of the Diganobs really lead the greenskins because they're weak little humans by comparison. They're never going to be able to survive the cut and thrust. They might kill a single orc war boss, but the next orc that comes along will almost certainly kill them. The chance of this becoming a thing is next to nil, and the big issue is they just won't get what it is to be orky. They don't have Waaagh energy moving through them. No one would follow them. It's just not how orcs work. There would be no interest in them. Just because you killed their war boss doesn't mean that you can lead them now. That's not how they work. You're not a greenskin. So I think the answer to this is just no.
Yeah, I will say...
You could build a story that says yes, but the general answer is no.
I would always advise keeping it as a no, because what would happen if you ever made this a yes is someone would immediately turn around and say, oh, this Chaos Champion of Khorne is now an orc wall leader. And now you have Chaos.
Exactly.
That's immediately what would happen.
Yeah, because and if that was the case, then it would have happened, and it hasn't. Just no. It's no.
Yeah. No. Now we do have the fun story of Little Gork, who was a giant that got hit in the head so hard that he started believing himself to be actual Gork, and makes goblins paint him green, and he leads a bunch of greenskins around as a big tribe, but he's a giant, so
it's also kind of funny in a weird way, and funny often works for greenskins over, say, Cord.
Yep. Still loading. Good. Go Tricky Felix. I've walked on a planet between fantasy and 40k. Sure, why not?
Yeah, if you want to merge your games like that, go wild. I've done it in the past. It's fun.
Okay, that actually out of nowhere, still loading. That gave me a super cool like zap to my brain of what would be a really cool story if I was doing some greenskin culture stuff. Would be the greenskin should have a whole myth about how like the reason why the Bad Moon is green and the reason why the planet Verdus is green is because Gork and Mork have stomped on it. And like it was like places they've stomped on their way to where they currently are. That would be fun. Of like whenever they see like a green astrological thing, they're like, "Yep, that's Gork and Mork doing Gork and Mork things."
I see no reason why that wouldn't be the case. That's super fun.
Mornington Crescent. Orcs get bigger the more they fight, the more they're infused with Waaagh energy. Isn't that just the mark of Gork/Mork? Wouldn't that just mean the pair of Waaagh? So my counter argument would be it doesn't require the divine effect, which is Waaagh energy, in order to accomplish. This is a natural part of greenskin life. It's like saying, well, if a lobster gets bigger over time as it keeps eating, or a crocodile, doesn't that mean it's blessed by the crocodile god? No, that's just what they do naturally.
Yeah, this is part of orc physiology. This is not necessarily divine involvement. Now, is it potentially exacerbated by Waaagh energy? Sure, maybe. I mean, that sounds good to me. Orcs believe that the more you fight, the bigger you get. Sure, you can add that component if you want to do so. And it would make absolute sense for Greenskins because their absolute belief in their culture and who they are and what they are is a core component of why they can do things that other species can't. So, yeah, I think this could be incorporated, but it absolutely isn't required.
Ricky Chapman, in our Wizard Wolfrup campaign, there was a mad shaman named Braz who was trying to convert humans to Gork and Work worship to show them the proper way. Great.
Sure.
That's totally fine. I would have
not shamans are mad.
Yeah, I would have fun with that. Like they're torturing people and trying to like put Waaagh into them and it just keeps exploding people's heads. I think that would be hilarious.
Oh no.
Donovan, off topic, but something that slightly puzzled me. Slash is the chaos god of Exodus, but the other gods also pitched as having access to their area. Does the excess other stuff also feed Slash? Yeah. So gods have overlap. That's fine.
Yeah,
it happens a lot. Don't get caught up on it.
Yeah, the classic one here is actually often not the chaos gods and how people like to discuss it, where they say something like this. Hey, look, Ulrich is all about war and bloodshed. And look at the bloody claws of Ulrich and the amount of blood involved with that. Surely that means he's just corn. No, overlap. And no. And no. And a whole host of no's. Now, we can get into a big, deep theological discussion as to why that isn't the case. But ultimately, the answer in the Warhammer world is no. In 40K, the answer is different.
Yeah. And also, I will say that there are some writers out there who really want that to be the case.
Particularly because it is in 40K as well. And for some writers, their theological discussions behind the scenes as to what is the truth of Warhammer has been port 40K, meaning that the Chaos Gods are the only real gods that exist, and all the rest of it is just mortal attempts to try and fight against those gods.
Nathan Shaw, hey guys, long time viewer, first time catching you guys live. Hey, well, thank you. First of all, thank you. Second of all, welcome. Just want to say thank you for getting me invested into the Warhammer universe. Can't wait to see a video about my boy.
You've been called out, Sotek.
I will say, there's something I want to say, but I not yet. But things, and I'll leave it there.
Things are happening.
Donovan. So what you're saying is Gorbad's Waaagh were somehow tricked into believing wyvern gates.
When I saw this comment, I was having a drink and I almost snorted coke out my nose. So if you don't know what this is all about, Gorbad Ironclaws, Waaagh, he does indeed send in some wyverns to open gates.
Go watch the
whole
Gorbad
story.
stream.
Go watch the Gorbad stream. The whole story is stupid. But we had a lot of fun with it when we were discussing it. Yeah.
The idea that there's just like some orc or goblin shaman that's like, the wyverns open the gates, all the guys, all the orcs are like, yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah, that's going to work. Oh, love it.
Cameo.
Hey, Cameo.
Welcome back, Andy. I'm uncertain if this is just an end times thing, but since Grimgor became the Gur incarnate, do either of you consider Greenskin to be more intelligent beasts or not really? So I will say this is an end times thing. It purely was just thrown in to set up the Greenskins as being the realm of beast species for AOS. It doesn't make sense with everything that came before it.
It doesn't. And I think it can be easily justified. Easily. I don't think it's a bad idea per se. The Wind of Gur does work really rather well with Greenskins. There is an awful lot of overlap here that can very easily show how they could be incorporated. And I can understand why someone would sit down and go, what we're going to do with the Greenskins? We've got 8 wins. Gur, that's the obvious one, isn't it? Because it is. 100%. But if you look at it and how it was implemented, it doesn't make sense at all. So I do think it needs to be either redressed, reimagined, or just quietly shelved. Well, let me shelved because Age of Sigmar, then redressed.
Yeah. Donovan, why are the Bad Moon and the Black Pit on the Realms of Chaos maps? Could you make examples of the Greenskin gods invading the realms of other gods? So, yes, would be the simple answer. We could get into a whole thing about the Realm of Chaos, but I'm just going to leave it at yes.
Yeah, because it's not the Realm of Chaos. That's the big mistake. It's the Realm of the Gods. It used to be, in some versions of the lore, the Realm of Chaos only, particularly when you're looking at 40k. But when it comes to Warhammer, it's the Divine Realms. The Divine Realms where all the god shit is going on. And in the Divine Realms, you get the Bad Moon, the Black Pit. You get all of it. Now, as far as Chaos are concerned, it's just the Realms of Chaos and what they haven't necessarily conquered yet. But it's not. It's much more than just that. It's the Divine Realms of we're being more accurate to what it represents for the Warhammer world.
Diamond again, I think it could be cool the presence of Greenskins somehow weakened the magical defenses around the Great Magical Forest, which led to Athelloren being heavily reduced during the Cataclysm. This could be a reference to how nothing used to be able to break down dead trees, leading them to pile up and be crushed, eventually forming coal until some fungi enzymes evolved to break down lignin. There's something you can do there. Yeah, there's absolutely something you can do there.
Yeah, there's something in that, Dynamite. I reckon you could turn that into a really fun crossover myth stroke story. There's definitely something in that.
Yeah, that could actually, man, I'll say that could actually give, like, if someone really wanted to have, like, a reason why the old ones brought the Greenskins, the idea that they, like, made Athelloren and then they created, like, these spiritual trees that can't be broken down naturally, and they're like, oh, shit. And they end up bringing in the Greenskins as, like, a natural predator to keep them under control. That could be fun. It's a stretch, but it could be fun.
There's something in there.
Hannibal, missed you both. Any chance of a Blood Bowl stream? You just want to see me and Andy scream at each other while dice betray us over and over and over again?
I love Blood Bowl. Maybe because I'm lucky. I mean, maybe we've got so many things to cover with Warhammer still. I mean, we're always just going, oh, there's so much yet to do. And there's more being added all the time as well. So maybe
this April. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, April Fool.
Yeah, maybe for April Fools we could do a Blood Bowl stream.
Our last April Fool was quite fun.
Yeah. Who's morkier, Skarsnik or Scragroth the Loon King?
Scott. Yeah.
I would say that's very much down to personal taste. I think they're both excellent implementations of Morky characters.
Agreed.
Just
really tough.
Prince Cheddar, dumb stream idea. Ranking Greenskin characters from Morkiest to Gorkiest. The extremes seem pretty obvious, but the middle ones seem fun to discuss. That could be a good stupid stream at some point.
Yeah, that could be a good stupid one, Prince. I like that one. Sorry, Prince Cheddar.
For the love of God, we're caught up.
Did it happen? Whoa.
Yes. Yeah, thankfully. So, a couple more things to discuss. So, one of the things that we could pivot into, talk about Gork and Mork, that I find really interesting is that while Gork and Mork are not super big on the ideas of, like, physical blessings, which we've talked about, one thing that the Greenskins give them a lot of credit for, which I don't think is necessarily true blessings, but rather Waaagh energy latching onto things, is the idea of Waaagh energy being put into objects, which is how we get things like the armor of Gork or the banner of Mork. And because you get a lot of these. There are a lot of magic items that are the blah of Gork or the blah of Mork, and they're all over the place. And whenever you read the stories behind them, they are items that are always described as they were like basically mundane things that then a shaman basically chanted a bunch over, or it was used in some big crazy fight, and then it takes on magical properties that just stay. probably my favorite example is the armor of Gork, which the armor of Gork is literally described as when it was originally shambled together. It was just like a collection of heavy iron and metal and stuff just cobbled together. But then a Greenskin wearing it got into a big fight, and by the end of it, it got charged with Gork's power that it like hardens and compresses together around the orc's form and becomes a genuine piece of magical equipment that has like very crazy magical properties.
I think what we have here, and I think is worth discussing, is a clear example of Warhammer having a different angle to 40k. In 40k, we've got our mech boys, and our mech boys cobble together bullshit items that work. And they do it very, very successfully. They create giant orc hulks that can somehow get across the heavens from one place to the next using weird warp field technology plus more, because that's how they're big field technology projectors. That's how they kind of work. In the Warhammer world, we do have an equivalent, but it's different. And the equivalent is magic. And the magic that they incorporate into their stuff, whether it is their weird boys equivalent, doing their big potions and crazy over their cauldrons, or alternatively, the artifacts that are created, appears to be a very real thing. And rather than the books laying out clean examples of why it works, they just say it does. And I think that what this needs is just an orc and goblin book for, say, the roleplay game, for example, where there's a clear career of an artificer of magic shit. Their equivalent of their mech boys. It's their mag boys, magic boys, or whatever. The ones who create shit, cobble away and make things that work. Bash the armor together and go, there you go, boss. That's going to work for you. Cobble together bullshit armor that goes out and is the fucking armor of Mork or the armor of Gork and kicks ass. And this is something that is sort of missing in Warhammer, but isn't, because it's repeatedly mentioned in almost every single army list that there is this artifact that just sort of got made and just sort of works. As is often the case with the orcs and goblins as a whole, they make shit that works. Pump wagons are bullshit. They shouldn't work. They do. They make shit that works. And that includes magic items. And there's an obvious answer here, and that is there is some form of I make magic shit guy. Now, if we're to use the existing lore, the answer for that is probably the shamans. The shamans are doing this too. They are utilizing and channeling the gods into these artifacts, if you wish to take it from that angle. Or alternatively, they're the ones that are just bashing the shit together and going, this works. But there is a hole in orc lore at the moment, and that is that they build entire camps, fortresses. They have got artificers in their society. Definitely do. We have got ourselves empire building orcs, which we've discussed in previous streams as well, which means that we have a variety of orcs that work on shit. And that is ultimately what's missing here. Who is the one that makes them and believes it works? Because they do work. And what is the equivalent of their mech boy? And I do believe they have one. It's just never been written. Now, you could combine it with Shaman, and if Games Workshop were to do it today, they probably would, because that's just the easy route, and it means that they don't need to add a new character type from nowhere. But if we were doing the roleplay side, I think there would definitely be a relatively long conversation around how we could build fun, interesting, extra orc careers that are unique for them, that fill up the holes in the lore and explain how certain things come about.
Yeah, I actually hard agree with that. I think the shamans kind of get overly pigeonholed as just like I do everything, lad. But like so many of these are things that have been genuinely carved or smithed or forged, and they go through like complicated blessing processes, which would obviously like, oh, you know, there are shamans involved to help. I like the idea of like shamans being involved to like help draw in more and more Waaagh energy that the smith requires.
Do they need it? I mean, do they need the shaman to do that? In the same way that mech boys don't need a weird boy to do the shit that they do.
I wouldn't say need to, but except for like the occasional like super item. But
I'm not even sure it needs a shaman. I think that orcs, by their very nature, are already super let's call them magical in terms of what they do. They don't need a shaman, for example, to daub their bodies with tattoos and suddenly be effectively immune to certain blows when they're savage orcs. That's not done by shamans, that's done by the savage orcs. And almost certainly a tattooist amongst the savage orcs, their equivalent of their mech boy, the one who's making the shit that's somehow different. And I think it doesn't need a shaman per se. We could make it a shaman, but I think it would, in many respects, just weaken orc lore. What we want to do is widen, broaden, add depth to their culture, not make everything just be answered by a single source.
Yeah, I guess the thing would be, the fun thing would be how it expresses different in each of the different subcultures. Where like the Savage Orc version would be very different than like the Night Goblin version.
Yeah, like a tattooist and doing all their tattooy things. The Night Goblin one, I'm building squig pens and doing crazy quick squig stuff or whatever. There's all sorts of different ways that it could be tackled. But as the lore currently stands, it kinda isn't.
Yeah, because when you mention it, I could think of, like, when I think of the Savage Orcs, the whole thing of the Guardian statues along the southern border that genuinely contain the land of the dead.
Yeah, like, 100%.
Like an orc literally sitting there chiseling away at these big boulders, making them into Gork and Mork effigies.
Yeah, I would really, I think there is an obvious and open hole in the orc lore just now, and that hole is their mech boy. The Warhammer mech boy. And the answer could just be do it with a shaman, but I personally think that is now a weak, boring choice. And also makes the orcs less interesting because there's fewer types of orcs. It just turns them into this big monolith of green with very little character, where we start building out lots of different types of orcs, all doing their own things in the Warhammer world. It just makes it a bit more interesting.
Yeah, the thing I would really like about that is it would allow the Black Orcs to finally have a character other than Warboss. Because Black Orcs, they don't have shamans. They're not capable of becoming shamans as far as
think of a Black Orc armor.
Yeah, so like a Black
with
Orc,
their
that would be so, because it would also allow them to have such a fascinating, like, what they ripped out of Chaos Dwarf culture to make into themselves, but instead of infusing things with demons, they infuse things with Waaagh energy. And
they're hammering out their really impressive weapons that they're giving to the Black Orc war bosses. You know, big weapons, big chunks of armor. It's fucking ace.
Yeah, of like, and then oh my god, I can see that being so cool. Of like the various smithing styles are how those cultures interpret like how Gork and Mork want to be put into an item. Like it's a very physical process, but it changes. Of like oh, that's super fun. That's super fun.
And it's those sort of ideas that that I'm often afraid Games Workshop won't do anymore, because the role-playing game often, instead of creating new ideas, just apes the material that's there and tries to add a little bit of extra flesh to it, but often doesn't do something new and interesting and exciting. And the old world game at the moment is just reproducing that came before with slightly different lore write-ups. But they're not adding anything new. Take 8th edition, for example, constantly adding with every single army list, not just new lore, but new unit types, new versions. And that's something we're not really seeing with the old world just now. It's almost like they're afraid to be creative anymore. So I'm super, it's almost like Age of Sigmar gets creation and the old world doesn't.
Man, I'll tell you what, I know that's how the 40K community feels, is that AOS gets to be the fun, coming up with new ideas setting, and they're just regurgitating Space Marine just endlessly.
And that's a bit unfortunate for Warhammer. And I think that particularly down over on the orc side, there's lots of holes in the lore that make no sense, and they could be very easily filled with some fun, creative thinking that also supports the Greenskins in the Warhammer world being unique. And also, if you want to say that they come from 40K, also supports that tacitly without saying it out loud.
God, yeah, I want that so bad. Like, because I just think of like the physicality of like the Black Orc ones are all about like cold smithing because they're so strong, and the cold smithing is required because of that extra violence is what brings Gork and Mork into it. Whereas like the Savage Orc is like, no, you have to hunt down the best beasts and use the biggest tusks and like the biggest bones, and their
blood and using their blood
chiseling.
And various things and various mushrooms to get the proper tattoos that they think you should have as well. Their big bones and the tattoos that they're pushing on.
The forest goblins are it's about like getting like the biggest Arachnarok venom and getting like the proper spider parts and like all this other stuff. It would be super cool. The Smite Boy, that's fun. Smite Boys is fun. Oh wow. Okay, I wasn't expecting the conversation to go there, but that was tasty. All right, let me get caught up on Super Chats real quick because a whole bunch of them just came in, and then we're gonna move on to two really, really big things, which is a Black Library story that actually featured Gork and Mork appearing, which is really fun. And then we'll of course talk about the Rogue Idols to pretty much finish us out because they're pretty important.
Yeah.
Fire Snake, a what if stream. What if Malekith had killed Morathi during the cult purge? That's
a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. My problem with a lot of the early what ifs is that they're all elf stories.
Well, that's because the elves are. Stuff.
Yeah, they really do, and the elves were so massively influential. But yeah, Fire Snake, that's a good one.
Yeah. Hannibal, my ex dumped me on Valentine's Day. I'm so sorry. I'm not laughing at you. I promise. A Blood Bowl stream would help. I
feel sorry for you there, Hannibal. That's a sad story.
That's super rude. You shouldn't be allowed to dump people on
Valentine's Day.
So mean.
Fuck me. I hope it wasn't by text, because that'd be worse.
It's like, come on, you couldn't have made it one more day. Oh my lord. Man, I just had a terrifying thought. A goblin shaman is caught in a dead end in a dwarf tunnel, and a bunch of warriors are about to charge him. Then he releases Curse of the Bad Moon down the tunnel. Imagine the first person POV of those dwarves facing the Total War version of that spell, zooming towards them down a confined tunnel. Yeah, well, I mean, that's something a clever goblin would do, is get you caught in a trap that there's no escape from, because that would be proper Morky now, wouldn't it?
That is very Morky. But if we're going by rather than just the very easy Total War summoning option, you probably need a whole bunch of Greenskins getting all fired up to get the right amount of WAAGh energy to get that into place. So that being the case, it would be much more withdrawing down into an area where there's a lot of Greenskins and then it just flooding back out again. It'd be awful.
Yeah, just a big ambush. Catching up. So this may have been answered. Do Greenskins have any afterlife or undead? So afterlife, yes. We do go quite in depth back on the afterlife stream, which if you haven't, you can go check that out. That was a really good Wednesday stream. We did a little bit, but yes, they have the Great Green, which is literally a green tinted paradise where all of the orcs and goblins believe that they will go to, and it's basically Valhalla, but without like the drinking and feasting part. It's just a fight that never ends. And Gork and Mork are there fighting.
Yeah, fighting. And then they go off and kick in other gods and other realms too. So the answer is yes, they have an afterlife. It's one big, gigantic fighting party. And they get to join Gork and Mork and go fight other things. But there's one thing that orcs and goblins love fighting almost more than anything else, and that's themselves.
Yeah. Here's my what if thing. Good, I can update this. I had to figure out where I put it. For undead, not through their own methods.
Yeah, I mean there've been a couple of orc skeleton miniatures, for example, with big huge jawed skeletons.
Oh yeah.
Generally speaking, it takes something special to raise something that's not human. And it generally requires a more powerful magic, something different. But generally speaking, that seems to be the case. Although you'll find that some writers have just gone, yeah, no, we can just have a whole ton of undead orcs or undead elves.
A spell type that I was actually kind of surprised they never ran with Greenskins, that I don't think that would be that big of a stretch, would be if there was like a lot of WAAGh energy and stuff, having a shaman like conjuring an image of like a really famous Greenskin that's just like this
coming in from the great
WAAGh energy that just starts attacking people. I think that would not be that big of a stretch, but it's something that's not been. It was actually done in Mark of Chaos. Mark of Chaos, there was actually an elite, there was a max tier spell that your orc shaman could cast where they would summon this big Waaagh energy guy that would just start punching people.
Yeah, and I think that absolutely makes sense. Some connection to the Great Green would be for us. Bunch of unique, interesting spells, definitely worthwhile. There is nothing saying that you couldn't, for example, get a particular casting number. You get so many 100 points worth of orc character that arrives and kicks around on the battlefield for a turn or two. So if it's the casting number goes up according to the cost of the character, but it only works on characters that are dead. And that would be a rare example of where the older army list, which included lots of historical characters, would actually be better because you could summon those back.
Such a cool way to handle that. Your 8th edition army is led by Gorbad because there was enough Waaagh energy that Gorbad just is back.
He mentioned the Great Green. He's like, that would have been an end time story.
Yeah.
When the world is breaking down, Ranadandra has come. The gods are walking the earth, and all the old orc warlords from the greatest Waaaghs are walking the Warhammer world again. Now we've got ourselves a bit of an end time story that's building up. That is also a proper validation of the previous editions of Warhammer, everything it offered, and it's something that all the orc players can go, oh, my favorite orcs are here. Yeah!
That would actually make Ragnarok a proper parody, too.
Ragnarok!
It's Ragnarok. All the greatest orcs and goblins are returning. And
it makes sense within their existing lore because Mork and Gork themselves gather all the greatest orc warlords to their side to basically take the fight to the other gods in the divine realms.
Yep. Donovan, interesting thought. What if the orc mech boy equivalent was actually more like a necrotech that could be specialized in making magical constructs like rogue idols and expand that to having some other similar units? I mean, that would just go part of the course. We'll talk about the rogue idols, but if you want to get like super funny, a lot of they're created by the exact same method that magic items are for Greenskins. But we'll get into those in just a moment. Gary Garana said, thank you for all the support today, by the way. I've seen your name a good number of times. So the AOS discussion in the new lore, Grugni and co. tried to give Gur to hash it as his domain. He became mad and decided to stomp it into the ground. When came Gorka Morka? Great question. I don't know until the new book comes out.
Yep.
Because there's definitely something going on there. Gorka Morka is he is the big bad of Gur, but now GW is saying something that Hatchet was involved in some way, and I don't know. We'll find out.
There's the story.
Elemental Exposure, tribute for the Orc Tooth Fairy in a tutu. Yep, everyone's the most horrifying children's character. Basement Toad, first time viewer / comment. Love the lore.
Oh, thank you, Basement Toad.
Of History of Fantasy. Quick question. How does AOS Zogrok Anvil Smasher Smith? So Zogrok is a fucking awesome character. As far as I'm concerned, I've backported him to fantasy. In my head, he's a fantasy character. He's a big black orc smith, and he has a squig that has a unique mutation where it has an anvil-shaped head made out of really hard scales, and he has a magic item that's been blessed by Gorka Morka that it's like a big blade looking thing that's always molten, it's always burning. So he uses it as a mobile forge. So he uses this big blade to heat up metal, and then he pounds the squig's head with pieces of equipment on it, and he uses it to enhance the weapons of Greenskins on the go and also give magical enchantments to round. He's super fun, but he's basically what we were discussing. He's a mech boy. He's a mech boy, and I'll post his link in chat for anyone that wants to look at him.
It's basically what we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, he's basically the Black Orc version of what we were discussing, but he's a gorgeous mini, and he backports into fantasy so hilariously easily that it's goofy. It almost feels intentional. But to me, he is the Black Orc version of the mech boy. And yeah, he literally just bonks the poor squig on the head. Bernard Demerville, my birds say hi. Well, hello to your birds. My folks are big into birds. We have so many bird feeders out back. It's crazy. Downman, expanding my runs of chaos question. For the bad moon, the answer makes sense since it's hovering above the 4 chaos realms. I know it's metaphorical, but the black pit is shown inside the realm of Zinc for some reason. So once again, though, the realms of the gods are constantly expanding and encroaching on one another. So the idea that the black pit, if it's the same black pit, which it might not be, there are more black pits than just that black pit, has infiltrated into Tzeentch, or Tzeentch's realm is encroaching upon it, or the spider god is encroaching upon Tzeentch's realm. I mean, the realm of chaos. So the map you're referring to, which is from 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, which shows the Four Gods realms, it is a
stylized map.
Yeah, it's a madman's stylized interpretation. It is not what it actually is. Like,
it's certainly not accurate.
You could not use that as a map to walk around. It would not work that way. The only way I could describe it is it's like trying to, like, imagine you went back in time like hundreds of years and you were trying to describe to a painter how radio waves work in our time, and he's like, okay, and he tries to like paint a rendition of what he thinks you're describing about like the electromagnetic spectrum that we can't perceive, but he tries to paint it. That's what that map basically is. It's not what it actually is. It's just a representation of what it is.
Yeah, agreed. Can I just bring up one here from Magladroth, because I checked back and I'm not seeing a super chat about the power of the Chaos Gods in the warp. So can you just repost that? Because I don't see it out there.
You don't need to repost it as a super chat. Just repost it as a regular comment and we'll grab it.
Yeah. Don't need to super chat it. Just bring it back up, because I've had a good look back and I'm not seeing it. That'd be really nice. Thanks. And apologies for missing it.
Phil, as a longtime Greenskin fan, I've always been miffed that both G-Orc and M-Orc are so clearly named and patterned after orcs, leaving the goblins by the wayside. Have you ever thought of coming up with goblin gods to add to the Greenskin pantheon? We already have them. We've got the spider god,
we've got a bunch of them.
Moon. There are more goblin gods than there are the other ones.
But Gork and Mork are right up there. And you can also note from spelling, definitely 40k is source.
Yes. Yeah, funny enough, the fantasy versions technically should probably have C's at the end of the name.
I had that conversation once with a writer a long time ago, where I was like, should we do it with C's? Because, and they were like, holy shit. And I was like, no, we're not doing it with C's. Oh, gosh, I really regret bringing it up because that's not happening. But he's like, but maybe we should. And I was like, no!
Brock 6000, can't think of any good questions or theories, just though loving the stream. Thanks, gents. Oh, well, thank you, Brock.
Thanks very much, Brock.
So we got 2 more things to hit on in the time that we have left, and I'm keeping an eye out for the comment from Magladroth. But so Gork and Mork do actually have the honor of, there it is. LAWhammer, my super chat was, how powerful are the Chaos Gods really in the realm of the gods? Are they all powerful, or just disproportionately powerful in the mortal world and normal within the warp?
So I'm going to give you some pretty controversial answers to this one.
That's not a can of worms at all.
Okay, so first, this is a mighty can of worms because the writers have not decided. And by that, I mean different writers will answer this question really differently. And they will think that they're right. But there are certain things that we can say for certain if you take the lore as a whole. 1, how powerful are they in the realm of the gods? They're not. They are just other gods in the realm of the gods. We know this because all of the various other gods have got their own realms, and those realms are not under siege, are not completely at war with chaos. If anything, chaos is at war with itself. They are just one part of a far greater whole. Not only that, the other gods that are on the other side, depending on which version of Warhammer we go with, are either dying off, weakening, getting more powerful, getting whatever. But loosely speaking, they are not the 40k gods, in that they are invaders into this space. And the space that they have here is small. That's one reading. Or 2, they came from here, and all the gods came from here, and they're not that powerful in the greater scheme of things here, but they are in other realms because they've warred across various multidimensional areas. That's another reading. But what we can say for certain is that loads of gods have got realms that chaos do not seem to threaten barely at all. And that in and of itself is fascinating. So are they powerful? Yes. All powerful? No. Disproportionately powerful? No. In the mortal world? No. They're not disproportionately powerful in the mortal world. Mutation comes from warpstone. Mutation comes from sources that aren't chaos. Oh, but all magic is chaos because it's coming in from the realms of chaos at the top. Yes, sort of. It's a really long, complicated question. The answer to this is, in world, it's deep theological, complicated, philosophical essays can be written for a long time, and that is fine. It's probably better we don't have clean answers for this, but they are nowhere near as powerful. Take, for example, the Old World's current take, where they basically say Chaos Gods are shit. They're trying to rise again, but they're shit. So shit, in fact, we don't even have worshippers of individual Chaos Gods. It's a weird take, but it's definitely a take they've sort of run with. So the answer to this is they're not all powerful. They're not disproportionately powerful. If anything, they're actually surprisingly weak, but their desire to take over the mortal realms is absolute.
Yeah, what I would say is keep in mind that most of the Warhammer Fantasy lore you're reading is at the 11th hour to midnight, where the end times is about to happen. So the Chaos Gods are in ascendancy.
Yeah.
But they're not always like that.
Yeah, and it seems to almost be a mechanical effect rather than the Chaos Gods themselves, in that their influence upon the world is in ascendancy, because their plan, which is to destroy it, is in a position where it can, because the Chaos Gates are close to exploding, going bad, and north and south, particularly in the north, which appears to be the worst one. And magic floods the world as the big gate opens wider, and it gives them an opportunity to finally try and break into the world and destroy it.
Yeah,
that's not the Chaos Gods are super powerful. It's just that they're in a position where they can effectively destroy the world, but it comes relatively rarely.
Yeah. Do not be shocked at all in the slightest if you come across like White Dwarf articles or writers from GW that'll be like, nope, they're like Big G God compared to all the other gods.
Yeah, absolutely. But the reality of the setting is constantly contradicting that view. But do be aware, I think it is definitely worth reinforcing that point, that we missed another one. Holy heck.
If we did, we skipped it, the Smite Boy one, because we had already talked about it earlier. So I don't know if that's the one you're talking about or if you're talking about a different one.
Yeah, because we definitely talked about that one. Holy heck. I'm not sure what happened there. But what was I going to say? Yes, there are some writers who think that Chaos is absolutely dominant, particularly those who also write for 40k. Because in 40k, they really kind of are. But in Warhammer, they're not. And they are constantly having this great power position that they have undermined by other gods, other stories, other tales, as each army list or each novel comes out detailing these other things. And you're left with, well, there's an entire realm of dead elves over there, and there's an entire realm of orcs, and they're not at war with Chaos. Apparently, Chaos is mostly at war with itself in the realm of Chaos section. Basically, the divine realms are infinite, enormous, and filled with gods. And Chaos Gods are just one part of that. But they have an absolutely unique view that most of the other gods don't. And that's that they want to destroy the mortal realms.
Super, thanks for the stream, guys. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you. In return.
All right. So, to go through the last two things really fast. So, Gork and Mork do actually make a fun appearance. They're one of the few gods in Warhammer Fantasy that in a Black Library book just full-on show up. Granted, once again, this is in the Scarstick novel. Yeah, and to heavily reiterate, this novel does a brilliant job because, once again, this is a third-hand source retelling this story, where Scarstick claims that when his Prada was being made, that he got knocked into a trance, and in his trance, he saw Gork and Mork punching each other and then pausing briefly to focus on him and be like, "Oi, you need to go do big things, and your name's Scarsnick." Like, they name him Scarsnick, which, granted, does seem very much like it could be one of those things Scarsnick is absolutely bullshitting to give himself
a lot of bad moon. He's high in mushrooms all the time anyway. Yeah.
It really comes off as one of those things Scarsnick is completely bullshitting about, but it could have happened. Who's to say? But because there are Greenskin characters that do genuinely believe they hear Gork and Mork talking to them. We get a lot of quotes from good old Waaagh, where Waaagh hears Gork and Mork constantly talking to him and telling him where to go, because he goes around to help all these other different tribes. So what Scarsnick says isn't impossible by any stretch of the imagination. It's not as weird as like if someone just like, yeah, definitely not really zogged out on Madcap at one time. But in the showing, they are pretty much what they're always classically described as, where they're basically two big naked orcs that look identical, but Greenskins can tell them apart, and they're just punching the shit out of each other. And it's a hoot. It's a holler. It's great. Because one of the things I find interesting about Gork and Mork is that for Greenskins, the separation between the rage of battle and joy is non-existent. Like, they have an anger and a happiness that are so deeply interwoven. Yeah, which is not something Korn understands at all. Which is fun. But the biggest manifestations that we have in Warhammer Fantasy, as far as like Gork and Mork flexing their absolute might, are what are called the Idols of Gork, or possibly Mork. Which are, you're probably familiar with them because they got a really iconic model from Forge World where there are these giant, huge golems that are just these ramshackle constructs that are vaguely Gork or Mork shaped. They usually have like a big goofy face. And in Total War, we got to see them really brought to life as kind of showing how bonkers the power of Waaagh magic is when it comes to
Gargants. They're Gargants.
They're proper Gargants. One of the things that's really fascinating about them is when you know constructs in Warhammer Fantasy usually have to follow a lot of really strict rules. Like there's often like a very core item somewhere in their body that holds them together, or there's a wizard that's actively controlling them and actively manipulating them, more like a puppet. There tends to be a lot of really specific rules that a construct needs to obey, and the idols just don't. They don't give a fuck.
It's like, hey, Gork's here. Woo!
Yeah,
come on, Gork!
There are notes in the Monsters Arcanum that they're terrifying things because A, you may notice this in Total War from their animations, they're not built together with any like great intent or purpose. So they're not like woven together. It's literally just a pile of rocks that gather up and they could fall apart and will just reassemble. It rips its own head off to like look around comically and just snaps its head back on. And one of my favorite notes about it that's really terrifying is that unlike almost all of the constructs, it is motivated by its own mind, which is that it wants to fight and just wrestle. There's actually a really fun Black Library, I think it's a short story, that's about a group of Empire Outriders finding just a random Idol of Gork. Like there's no army with it. It basically got separated from a Waaagh and it just kept going. It just keeps going because it's just eager and wanting to fight. And you have this group of guys on horses with their cute little guns trying to stop a fucking moving stone monster. The most horrifying note about it for me is in the Monsters Arcanum, there's a thing that says the true nastiness about them, which implies something, in my opinion, about Gork and Mork that's really, really spooky, is that even when they're destroyed, and they fall apart and they die, the Waaagh's defeated, the Greenskins are ultimately routed. There have been recorded cases where seemingly for no reason, completely random, it just reactivates. It just stands back up, all the rocks pull themselves back together, and by itself, it just goes out on another rampage. And that there doesn't seem to be a genuine, true way to kill them other than you just hope they basically kind of stay bored.
Yeah, I quite like the idea here of effectively reinforcing what we were discussing earlier, which is fabricators. The idea that the orcs can pull some shit together and they believe it will work. And in this unique instance, they pile up all this shit together and they believe Mork will manifest through it. And he does. And you can even then justify how they could reassemble later. And that would be when locally more Greenskins are coming back and there's a tribe over there and another tribe over there in the forest and the Waaagh energy is building. And slowly but surely those rocks begin to shake as the old Waaagh energy just taps into what's there and it begins to reassemble. It's almost like the presages of a new Waaagh coming. You can almost see it as a symbol, a foresight of what's to come because Gork has come back. And that's super cool. And it really reinforces everything that the orcs are. How much we as outside readers and looking at everything they do, say they believe it will happen. And thus we go, well, that means whenever they believe anything, it comes true. But we forget that orcs are almost pre-programmed in terms of their character. They don't just believe new shit. It's not like they can just go, well, today I believe yellow is great, so thus all yellow things are going to be great. That's not really how they work. They instead work on a far deeper level where they believe what is going to work because it does. It's a far more cultural thing than it is just simply their top minds believing an individual thing. And we could easily here, again, justify our fabricator type, our orc who makes shit, our smith on the black orc side, the one who builds the things and everybody knows it's going to come, and then in comes Mork, in comes Gork. And I think you can make some super cool different versions for both Mork or Gork manifesting. And they are ultimately the fantasy equivalent of the Warhammer 40k Gargant. The tech, and that's why a fabricator makes sense for it, because we are building using mech boys, or alternatively our fabricator boys, whatever the heck you call them, and in that comes this gigantic horrific entity that is ultimately not ever going to stop even when it's destroyed, because when the next Waaagh comes along, it can come back.
Yeah, which does add up, because like we know that when a Waaagh is building, Greenskins from like hundreds of miles away can sense it, like, and they're drawn towards it, which, like, one of the things that's really interesting about Gork and Mork's power and reach within the world is that whether it's being carried on the winds of magic or just has its own unique thing, the reverberations of Gork and Mork's presence within the world is fucking colossal.
Yeah.
Like it's weird how well it resonates across the world. It's almost like it's like a superconductor. Which is very unique, because like there's no other force that works like that. Like, you know, if there's like a particularly powerful spell, a wizard from a ways away can sense it, but like to the level that Greenskins do is weird.
Yeah, it's almost like the mycelium network, which we've discussed before as a potential route. And that mycelium network, that network of fungus, taps through the world and also seems to carry Waaagh energy. It would be very easy for a writer to say, oh, it's just Gur, isn't it? But it isn't. Gur, if that was the case, all of our shamans, our big Gur users, would suddenly become super powerful. They would suddenly become mightily powerful as all the Gur is flooding through the land, but it isn't, because it's Waaagh energy. Well, and Waaagh energy is its own unique thing.
Yeah, and Waaagh energy would affect animals, which it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely doesn't. So the Waaagh energy gathers and then moves towards a head to the individual who's at the front of the Waaagh. I just hit my metal straw. Who's at the front of the Waaagh. And then all of the various things that the orcs know is going to happen, because that's what it is to be orky, starts happening. Their artifacts become magical. Their armor becomes magical. The great, huge, mighty idols to Orc and Gork begin to shift. Waaghs are terrifying, and they're terrifying because ultimately at heart, Waaagh energy is Mork and Gork, and Mork and Gork's manifestation in the world is nothing more than the great connection that all the orcs have. It's cool. I love it. I love the orcs and goblins. I think they've really been developed into something relatively unique for Warhammer, that are quite beyond simply what their 40k origins suggest.
Yeah, and to go a little further with the uniqueness is that another thing when it comes to like building a construct or something like an Idol of Gork is that you might think that, oh, they're all stone because maybe that's magically resonant. And no, idols can be made out of almost anything. Stone, bone. There are literal shit ones. Yeah, there are literal giant
piles of orc dung.
Yeah, that come to life and start killing people, which is horrifying on so many levels. Like, of all the ways I wanted to die, being crushed or drowned in a living orc shit golem is not on my list.
No, it's not cool, but I think it also speaks to the fact that our classic use of the winds of magic sort of half falls apart when we're discussing orcs. And I think if I was going to take anything away from this one, it would be that if you're a writer out there and you happen to pass by this one, try not to make Waaagh magic the winds of magic, because it isn't. It's just so very different, and it manifests very differently. And if you do make it that, it makes the orcs significantly less interesting. They don't have their unique thing. They don't have their shtick. You are taking away from them to try and support the great winds of magic position, which, as we've said, isn't the only form of magic in the old world. Magic manifests in lots of different ways.
Yeah, especially because we do have really good notes about Waaagh magic disrupting regular magic. One of my favorite examples is there's a story about down in the Southlands. There was a ruined Lizardman Temple City where something shifted, basically, and it caused a chaos portal to rip open in this ruined city. And like the Lizardmen go to fight, and they're fighting all these demons pouring out, and then a bunch of Savage Orcs show up. And the Savage Orcs look at both sides and go, this is weird. And then they just do what Savage Orcs do best, and they run forward and they kill everybody. They just start crumping everything. And the shamans go, because they see this big, horrible portal, and they go,
in the sky.
Gork and Mork will fix it! Gork and Mork will fix it! And they build this big Gork and Mork statue, and it seals the portal. It just snaps it shut. And everyone else, for like an elf or a slan looking at that to go, what the fuck? Like, the fact that the idol, the guardian idols, actually hold back undead, make it difficult for the undead to pass into the Badlands, is a showcase of disruption of magic that is not being done by a magical thing, which is crazy.
Like, just take a look at how Grom got through the high elf defenses around Althuin. He shouldn't have. It should have been impossible. The spells there are ridiculous, yet still carve right through the heart of it with all that Waaagh energy. It's something different, and that's to be, I think, celebrated rather than homogenized. Yep.
Laughing God, Sotek, please petition CA to make a poop idol unit. I will not. As much as that would have been an interesting Regiment of Renown version. I'm gonna pass on that, fam.
So that being the case, we're coming near the end, aren't we? So
I think
let's do a quick summary from me, because I've got a couple of things that I'd like to say to end this off. Mork and Gork are a fine example of how Games Workshop can take ideas and cram them together and make something better in the end. So the ideas in this case are all from 40k. Let's be as blunt as we can be. Mork and Gork were a 40k creation, not a Warhammer Fantasy creation. They were built for 40k to support 40k and what they were doing with the orcs in 40k. But nevertheless, they still provided a really good model for something they could port back to fantasy. And they did. And through that porting, they created all manner of problems for the fantasy setting. And these problems were big and deep, not just because Mork and Gork existed, but because orcs themselves changed. And what orcs were in Warhammer moved from being these weird greenskin, often marauding or nomadic tribes into 40k orcs and goblins, or orcs and Gretchen, if you will, but without the tech. Wandering around being 40k equivalent. And as 40k advanced in its background and took on, for example, spores as what they were, Warhammer kind of followed in suit. And we ended up with some really unique ideas being brought into Warhammer, but without a great deal of thought for how those new ideas would impact orcs and goblins as they stood, really put in place. And I think that's largely where I'm going to conclude. Mork and Gork are fucking brilliant. Mork and Gork are these great gods that are constantly fighting the other gods, and, as we discussed right at the beginning, crumping even the chaos gods. And that's cool. It's a story that means that the chaos gods themselves are concerned about the Greenskins, because the Greenskins are not evil and they are not chaos. They are a force of nature. They just are. They're the great green tide, and even chaos themselves should be concerned about their great plan to wipe out the world and what the Greenskins could do to stop that when they come together, because they like the world. They don't want it to go boom, and they are one of the potential living forces in the Warhammer world that can defend it. So they have to be taken down too, and Mork and Gork can never lose. They just come back to fight another day. And that's something that's going to get rage-filled Khorne really fucking upset. And that makes for some really fun, cool stories. But Mork and Gork don't get used in any of the stories. None of them. Mork and Gork don't have great wars against the elves when Grom comes piling into the elves. And by that, I mean the elven gods. Mork and Gork don't have wars against the Chaos gods when, let's be honest, loads of orcs have gone against the Chaos gods. Great Waaghs have gone in those directions. It doesn't happen because Mork and Gork live in this weird little satellite realm that no one really touches because they don't know what to do with it. And the answer is Age of Sigmar. Age of Sigmar, in many respects, provides the template of what's going on in Warhammer. It's just Age of Sigmar has run with it, and Warhammer hasn't. And there is a creative, almost pool of nothing, a dark pit that everything has fallen into on the Warhammer side, where they're so tied to the original version of the orcs. They're so tied to this idea of female orcs and male orcs, or they're so tied to the idea of the great orc tribes moving around, and they're afraid of the 40K-ization of orcs, that they just do nothing with them. They just replicate the same story again and again and again. Waaagh! Weird boy, orc. Waaagh! Weird boy, orc. Without adding any extra stories. Without going, what the fuck does Mork and Gork mean for the Warhammer world? They don't care. Because that's not necessary for the army list. But it's really important for the roleplay game. And should have been really important for the end times and its conclusion. So my great conclusion, if you will, is that Mork and Gork have been stiffed. They have been poorly written, poorly used, poorly deployed, and it's not until Age of Sigmar that they begin to have their own stories actually be brought to the table. And I think that when we look at Warhammer as a whole, we have to sometimes go, yeah, Age of Sigmar is the sequel, and Age of Sigmar isn't just the sequel in terms of it's what's coming next, and thus that's all the new stories we can look forward to. It's also, oh, this is what they are. Oh, we need to backport that. Because that's what they are. So Age of Sigmar has taught us that the Greenskins have been absolutely and completely misused when it comes to their divinities. Gork and Mork fucking rock. They're great gods. What the orcs and goblins are astonishing for Warhammer because they are almost unique creations in fantasy now. They are completely different to any other sort of orc and goblin out there. For all they might look the same, for all lots of people have copied Games Workshop and just applied their version of their big-nosed goblins or their orcs. Look at World of Warcraft, for example. The Games Workshop version of them now are super cool. But they're almost afraid of them because of the deep 40K connections they have. And it took breaking away from Warhammer for this to eventually become a proper use of their gods. And if you're out there thinking of how to use them for your games, I suggest, actually, very rarely for me, go to Age of Sigmar, have a good dig around, see what they've done, and go, what can I do to make my Mork and Gork work really well for Warhammer?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add just three things off the top of my head, very briefly about Gork and Mork or Gorka Morka from fantasy that would work really well in fantasy from AOS. Like the idea that AOS has where there are different ages where sometimes Gork and Mork get so into a punch up that they end up like melding into one entity that is Gorka Morka that attacks outwardly. And then it starts getting into a fight and rips itself in half, and it's Gork and Mork again. They're punching one another again. And they go through these eras where sometimes it's one entity, sometimes it's two entities, is fun. The idea that the other gods of the Greenskin Pantheon are related to Gork and Mork. So like the Bad Moon. Oh, Morslib? Yeah, Morslib's green because Gork and Mork tried to eat it once. And it ended up being too weird.
Spat it out.
Yeah. It ended up being too weird, and they didn't like it. It tastes bad, so they spit it out. But that's why it's green, and that's why.
And you really want to tie into Warhammer's myths, okay? The reason Morslib exists is because Gorka Morka, when they arrived, spat it out from the Chaos Gate.
Yeah.
Okay, you can easily tie it into the existing myths of the Cataclysm.
You know, the idea that because in Age of Sigmar, like the Spider God who's still around, we have an origin for the Spider God AOS, which is that it was this horrifying giant monster spider that managed to creep up on Gork and Mork, and it bit into their feet and drank their divine blood, which caused it to swell, and it became this horrifying divine monster because it's infused with the blood of Gork and Mork. And like they have all these myths of gods being created incidentally because Gork and Mork are so destructive that they just create natural disasters in the form of new gods in their wake, which is fun.
Perfect. It's great.
Effortlessly.
Yeah, I agreed completely. So we have ourselves a rare situation where I'm going to say, yeah, we don't diss Age of Sigmar here. Let's be clear. We always say Age of Sigmar was created from a lot of what we feel are very bad decisions for the end times. And Age of Sigmar has become its own unique thing, which is awesome. And it is directly related to Warhammer. And that means everything in Age of Sigmar is potentially something, particularly when you're looking at the gods, that we can port back. So in this case, I strongly recommend go take some reading of maybe material that you don't necessarily want to read, because we have ourselves a clean example of Gork and Mork being handled better.
Yeah, better than they are in any of the other things.
Games Workshop can do it. They ported it over from 40k. You can do it. Port it over from Age of Sigmar.
All right, grabbing some last minute comments. This one's actually a little interesting. Samora says, "Hi Andy Sotek, have you seen Old World as part of the main brand according to Games Workshop's recent financial reports? Also, GW mentioning expanding the India market and its Japanese sales have risen up 26% on top of Old World being main brand. Do you think about some factions in the future might be given?" Yeah, it's been a talk a lot in the background, and something me and Andy have talked about on this show is that Old World has a lot of potential, especially with Grand Cathay, and it seems like financially that potential is
it seems to be paying off. Look, the Old World, it was rather interestingly pitched as their OG setting. It's the original, and I thought that was a super interesting way to pitch it, because
they called it the revered setting in the report, which was
indeed, and whilst they're still pulling the old, World of Legend, and it's actually the past. It's not what we're currently doing, because Age of Sigmar, in many respects, is just Warhammer Fantasy. So beforehand, they were often saying Age of Sigmar is our fantasy setting that roots all the way back to 1983, basically. Now they said, no, actually, that's the Old World. And that is a different pitch. And it also does suggest that the Old World's doing a lot better than some of its detractors would like to claim.
Yeah. But, the Kingdoms of End and Nippon, not looking unlikely. I'll say that.
Straight.
Predators, last super chat here. Hey, guys, hope you're doing well. I was curious, do you guys think about how 40k orcs can reincarnate? Do you think fantasy orcs could do the same? So if you go back a little earlier in the stream, we talked about ways that could happen. So the answer is vaguely yes.
Yep, vaguely yes.
All right,
excellent.
And that's us. Thank you all so much for joining. I am definitely I probably need to get out of here because there's a giant thunderstorm going on right now, and I don't want it to knock out my power. So I do really, really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. Just a couple of quick little managerial things of that. This Wednesday will be a very special stream because we're going to be joined by not only Vera, but we're also going to be joined by the amazing Lindsay Law. And we're going to be talking about a elf god. Before the stream starts, the four of us are going to narrow it down to 4 options. And then you, the chat, will get to vote on which of those 4 we're going to go with. And we're going to basically have a fun little brain.
Create a god.
We're gonna flush out. And
develop a god.
Yeah, but granted, some of them are so undeveloped, we're basically making them from scratch.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Then this Friday will be LAWhammer, of course. Things are getting pretty hot and heavy in LAWhammer.
I've got a feeling, if I'm correct, I think Ed's off this week, and that's really good, because if that's the case, we're doing an Age of Myth episode, which will be diving into what actually happened in the past some 2,000 years ago around these events, and a particular build up for the last couple of episodes. I don't know if you saw the card for last week. There was a certain dragon there, and the card from week before, another dragon there. It'll be the Age of Myth episode with a dragon.
Yeah, if you want to see a brilliant example of Andy taking retcons by GW and pivoting them into working super well with old stuff, it's what the 2 most recent episodes are brilliant. They're brilliant examples of that. And then next Sunday over on Loremaster of Sotek channel, thanks to y'all's vote, we're going to be covering Astragoth Ironhand, the eldest of the Dawizar and the great leader of the Sorcerer Prophets and Waluigi cosplayer. It's going to be super fun.
Yeah, that's going to be super cool. High Priest of a Shot, here we come.
Yep, there will be a new poll up here on the LAWhammer channel in just a little bit. And we'll have some other potential exciting news soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you guys next time.
See you all next time. Bye-bye!